Have you ever heard the phrase, history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes? I'm a firm believer that our individual lives aren't just entropy consolidated by chance, but rather songs intricately woven together in a chorus of wonderful poetry we can't even begin to comprehend. Throughout my life, I've noticed a series of rhymes that echo from the deepest roots of my past into the present. One such verse of poetry happens to be the circumstances tied to making this video. Over the past 5 years, I would write an outline or full script to explain the future of my channel and destination unknown, but once I started recording, something major would occur that would make my script and recordings so outdated in such a short period of time, I have had to start over way more times than I can count. If any of you noticed my community post earlier, yeah. So, I have had to redo the entire outline and recordings twice since posting that. It's as if the universe itself is dead set on keeping me silent forever.
Gotta give the universe some credit, bro. I only wanted to decorate your room in vines. I never imagined this. I guess the universe just hates you.
You see, I might find that slightly amusing if my head didn't feel like it was about to explode.
So, I put away the script and I'm going to get through this with the briefest outline possible and allowing my pure, unfiltered thoughts to speak for themselves. With that said, I'll have a more formal update on everything in the future in regards to Destination Unknown, my channel, and my new comic, Expedition Uncharted. With that said, I'm going to summarize briefly some of the topics that I'm going to explain ahead, so you can judge for yourself whether or not it is safe for you to watch this section of the video. First, I will go into my early childhood and my struggles with bullying, taekwondo, and a loss of friendships often due to circumstances beyond my control. In some sections, I will reference the economic disparity that my family was in, and I'll also, throughout the video, make references to my faith. Because unless you've been around my channel since 2017 when I went by my confirmation name Sylvia, you might not know that I grew up in the Catholic Church. So I would like to clarify that while I did deconstruct from the Catholic Church, it was to grow in faith in God. And I cannot talk about my story without talking about God in multiple occasions. One such example that I do plan to make a video on sometime, I always have planned to make a video on it, but that would be how I ended up getting my own mortgage. God was a very consistent player in that narrative. That's not to discredit my own hard work that got me to that position to be able to buy a house in the 2021 COVID housing bubble. But when I say that things that happened during that should have been impossible, even when I had to take that summer job and take a leave of absence from work, that whole thing should have been impossible, but it happened because I had good standings with my coworkers and my fellow neighbors and my family, even if they were driving me up a wall. To say that it just happened through my own hand completely discredits the supernatural shenanigans that occurred surrounding it. I don't plan to get into that in this video, because it'd probably be a whole 40-minute section to get into the weird shenanigans from Cedar Point to finally moving out of my parents' place. But I use that as an example to explain a pivotal life moment that can't be fully talked about without getting into my faith. This is my channel and my story. If you cannot accept the part of me that belongs to Jesus, that is okay, but know that you will always be accepted on my channel, and I try my best to cater this space to be as welcoming as possible, but I understand if you have been hurt by other people in various different walks of life, whether it be from religion, philosophy, cultural standards, cultural norms. I understand, and if this is something that is personally triggering to you, I just wish you the best and I hope you have a really good day. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. Your emotional well being and safety as a viewer of my channel or just this video is my top and fullest priority. I'm putting this here so you are aware, and I won't have any hard feelings if you have to click away or unsubscribe because I understand. That is also a good segue into a fourth point I do want to give a content warning on. I will talk briefly about the alt-right pipeline at some point around 2015 to 2019 because my social circles were mostly men who had various different political ideologies. I was consuming a bunch of different content, which caused me to unknowingly fall down the alt-right pipeline briefly, and I want to open up about it. Firstly, to explain some of the things I personally know as someone who's been there from the early days before it became a massive and dangerous thing. And second, so that if there is anyone watching this video who may currently be in the pipeline and might not even realize it but have questions, know that I am someone you can talk to and I won't judge you at all. Even if you still hold some of these beliefs that you may not be sure are something you should, or you're afraid to speak up because you know that if you say something wrong, other people might come after you and just expect you to know. I know what it's like, and if you don't have anyone else in your life to shoulder this sort of pain that you might be going through in loneliness, I am someone you can talk to about that. Just know that from my experience and what I have seen and how things developed and why I had to get away from it, I think it is one of the most dangerous Trojan horses someone can get involved in. And if you're watching this video and you don't understand why it is a Trojan horse because you haven't been involved in the alt-right pipeline, bless your soul. I hope that if you are brave enough to endure that section of the video, you'll understand why I will refer to it as such, because it's not what you think it is on the surface, and it slowly drags you down until you have no way out. That is why it's so dangerous. The final content warning is Destination Unknown and Expedition Uncharted spoilers. I like talking about my story. I will gush about it quite a bit. I will talk about some large lore pieces. Like, these are not just going to be like, oh, funny little tiny lore crumbs. I am going to drop bombshells on you about my story. Why? Because as I have constantly joked, most of my lore is beyond the firmament. What I mean by that is a lot of it is the creator and how the creator operates and how the spirit realm functions. So that doesn't really get too much into the characters' narratives themselves. So I can get away with spoiling some of the biggest lore bombs without spoiling the characters' stories. I'll explain it more in sections ahead, but if you're not comfortable with spoilers, they're gonna kind of just be randomly brought up over and over again as my stream of consciousness flows. So you've been warned. And on that note, it's hard to explain Destination Unknown and what sort of happened to me regarding it without explaining the story of my life, essentially. Because what happened to me after I released the pilot hit closer to home than I can really describe in just a few sentences. So I think it's best that we start out at the beginning. According to my parents, I was a happy and bubbly child who was full of energy, always smiling and eager to befriend strangers in the park or on play structures at restaurants to enrich my playful engagement with the physical world. It's difficult to say when everything started to shift for me, But I believe my personality would slowly get pushed down over the course of grade school due to bullying, economic disparity, and having a string of serious bad luck when it came to those I was closest to moving away. I don't remember the bullying in kindergarten, but apparently it was so bad my dad, who was my martial arts instructor, ended up asking the teachers if I could do a show and tell to the class and break boards. This apparently caused whatever was going on back then to subside, but it wouldn't stop me from being a frequent target. From an early age, the life skills from Taekwondo were instilled in me, and it gave me a drastically different understanding of the social world around me. One of the earliest things I was taught about was the difference between reporting and tattling. But there were a couple of girls who made it their life mission to upset me almost every morning in first grade. But it never stopped, and eventually the adults even accused me of being a tattletale, despite me not only being uncomfortable. I also couldn't tell when kids were being sarcastic or trying to lure me into what I thought was reporting to the adults, only for the kids to tell the adults that I didn't know how to take a joke or I was making it up. Nothing was ever done about this, but this wasn't what would break my spirit. If anything, I still had a veil of ignorance back then, so while it was annoying and hurtful, they weren't weights I carried with me after those moments passed, and I'd be free to be myself at home. There was one incident, however, that got many in my first grade class to call me legal name the Tattletale, which would be one of the many incidents that made me uncomfortable with my birth name. So, there were two kids who were going to get secretly married behind the shed in an area the recess aides told us not to venture off to because not only could they not see us, but it was very icy for some reason back there, and if we didn't watch our step, we would slip and fall. And me, fearing for everyone's safety, ended up crashing the childhood wedding with the recess aide. Also, you guys were 6! Like, who gets married at the age of 6? I couldn't comprehend it. And that's another rhyme that's followed me my whole life. I was the realist that got scoffed at for simply stating to my table mates that they would likely never talk to the Jonas Brothers or Justin Bieber or any other male celebrity the girls were obsessed with. So if it wasn't obvious, I was pretty much the big nuisance to a lot of other kids' childhood fun, all because I didn't understand the appeal of breaking the rules or boys. But one of the earliest patterns that always stuck out to me were other kids who I thought were cool stated they wanted to be my friend, but because I picked my nose or because I liked weird stuff like Pokemon or Avatar, it was a deal breaker. Oh man, have the times changed since then. Like, could you imagine nowadays being picked on for liking Pokemon or Avatar The Last Airbender? Though that's the cool stuff now, but when I was growing up, oh no, you couldn't be into that, especially if you were a biological girl. But I am not ashamed to admit that even as an adult, not only do I still have these obsessions, I also still struggle with trying to keep my finger away from my nose. What the adults in my fellow kids didn't understand back then is this was a tic. I often wouldn't have any idea I was doing it until someone told me to wash my hands, or someone would call it out and point fingers at me and have everyone laugh at me. But I'd get shamed by the adults too for it, even though I literally had no control over it. While I have found ways to modify it over the years, such as scratching my cheek or putting my pointer finger to my forehead as if I'm thinking instead, it's still something that I haven't been able to remove the motion from. And I don't know why. It could just be something that, if you do something enough times as a kid, it becomes ingrained as a habit. But when I say it is an uncontrollable motion, it is an uncontrollable motion. So I'm in my 20s now, and I still struggle with it. Though I think the reason this was such a deal breaker for kids is I've never once had shame about it, and that would freak those out who didn't have the tic but would secretly pick their nose in private. But I use this as a very early example to illustrate my lifelong philosophy about how I'm not going to change myself to fit in with the world around me, and that's probably why I've ended up so isolated into adulthood. In second grade, I would make my first long-term best friend. However, this newfound friendship came with a new form of bullying: ultimatums from other kids. It's hard to explain, but for some reason, other kids didn't like the kids I would befriend, and many of those kids I would grow closer bonds with happened to be my fellow outcasts and weirdos. But these other kids would always approach me, sometimes even in front of my friends or the new acquaintances I had made, and offer their own friendship in exchange for cutting ties with those very people I was forming a legit bond with. And this is a pattern that would follow me even into work as an adult. It's a trauma that's very difficult to open up about, but when I joined Twitter in 2017 and got involved in some early social circles when I first started YouTube, call-out culture and the drama surrounding it would cause me to relive this childhood bullying all over again for years. Because even if the kids who approached me back in grade school weren't actually being serious, though when I think about who some of those people were, and they were the same ones in first grade who wanted to be my friend, if I just changed some of my habits or interests, I do think it was genuine for some of them. But seeing other people go through social ostracization and then anyone who is associated with them instantly linked as problematic if they don't heed the call out or private warnings was, for lack of a better term, triggering. I don't think I can emphasize this enough. These were memories I had mostly buried back then. And it wasn't until I was subjected to the same tactics on the internet with mostly people I didn't know, so I didn't have any room to judge, they would resurface and I'd begin to process some of those emotions I never allowed to feel myself back then. And I don't know if anyone watching this video currently was there when I was new to this internet subculture and the standard and how confused I was that people would just listen to call outs, but that's what was going on with me internally. To me, if I isolate the person being put on blast, even if I don't personally know them or personally agree with their actions, that would be the present equivalent to abandoning my acquaintances and friends bullies wanted to alienate altogether from childhood. Now, while I have come to a better understanding of the tattling versus reporting nature of internet callouts now, it's really difficult for me to look at it through an objective black and white lens when this is my background and it goes entirely against the person I was raised to be thanks to being the child of a martial arts instructor. That doesn't mean that there aren't parts of myself I've had to deconstruct and realized, wow, this belief I've had instilled into me by authority figures for over 20 years is actual indoctrination. But deconstructing anything you hold as a core identity of your character for a long time is a process, and a very, very long one. If only we had a bit more empathy for our neighbor, would the world be a better place? I was actually going to put this section in a different part of the video, but on that note, this is a solid segue into one of the main themes in my current comic, Expedition Uncharted. It takes place a few decades after the events of the Destination Unknown pilot, and it's about the next generation of characters navigating a world that is coming out of its initial post-war Reconstruction era. Every focused character comes from a different background with various heritages and propaganda they've been subjected to individually. While I don't want to talk too in-depth about it because of spoilers, Habari is a character who is written explicitly to showcase religious trauma and the guilt associated with atrocities that have been committed in the name of organized and radicalized groups. And you contrast him with his best friend Akyun, whose dad was a part of a group that helped Comaris on their global conquest. But to Akyun, who grew up around mostly Mediterraneans who fled east during this time, despite being a historian, he is blind to just how bad the conquest was globally due to a rose-tinted worldview shaped by propaganda. However, I won't say much due to spoilers. And since we're reaching the climax for season 1, I really do need to shut my mouth. But boy, am I really excited to get into the next parts of the story. With that shameless promotion out of the way, let's head back into my elementary school days. In 2nd grade, I made my first best friend. This was a friendship that would leave a large impact on me even to this day. And I ended up reaching out to her recently, despite having it been almost a decade since we last communicated, to see if it'd be okay if I share some of these stories. Something that's difficult to talk about with me is since I talk to everyone and I try to befriend everyone even if they're not going to feel friendship for me in return, it allows me to know a bunch of things and some knowledge I kind of wish I wasn't carrying. But out of respect for all the people who have confided in me over the years, I don't want to accidentally air out traumas or dramas or anything of that matter without someone's permission. But unfortunately, because my own story is so interlinked to so many other people's individual stories and their trials and tribulations, it's really hard for me to talk about my story without the help of others. Anyway, my best friend from 2nd grade to 5th grade, we were inseparable pretty much since the day we met. But all I know is we were in the same 2nd grade class, and she was my best friend. But I also received a bunch of crap for being her friend. For me, one of the most impactful and core memories is one day I came into class and there was a note on my desk and it had a heart on it and it said it was from my best friend at the time. I was excited. I wondered what was going to be in there. What would she leave on my desk with a heart on it? And I open it and it said, "We are no longer friends. I hate you." I was crushed. In fact, I believe the first thing I did was run to the bathroom and cry. Cry and cry. I had no idea what I did. The previous day, we were talking just as we always have, playing on the playground, but in my mind, I saw this as a form of communication and a boundary. I know one of the things that was taught as one of the life lessons was self-respect and respect for others, so I internalized this as needing to respect her space. If she didn't like me anymore, then I was just going to respect it. So gym class came around and she storms up to me and she goes, "Why do you not want to be friends? What happened? Why do you hate me?" And I'm confused because I went, "You just left a note on my desk saying that you hated me. I don't hate you. I would never say something like that." It turns out that this was all orchestrated by a bunch of girls who just wanted to alienate my friend. They did not like me being friends with her, so they took matters into their own hands, and I was gullible enough to fall for it, just like I was gullible enough in 1st grade to think that these crazy plans all those girls had were legit. But, they only kept us separated for half a day. It was resolved by lunchtime and we hugged it out. But, man, does this still bring back emotions even now? I just can't believe that some kids were so angry that I was friends with her, that she had friends, that she had someone to love her, that they would resort to that. It was awful. I don't even think I can begin to describe just how awful that was for my 7-year-old self and for my friend back then. But this wasn't the only time this happened. When I mentioned before that ultimatums was the most impactful form of bullying I received in elementary school, this was what I mean. It was notes, it was people approaching me in front of her or my other friends and acquaintances and trying to entice me away. Sometimes they'd say outright that they wanted to be my friend, but they weren't invited. Or they would pull me away and then they'd have a conversation with me and tell me, it's like, oh, did you hear that so-and-so hit the teacher? Or did you hear that so-and-so did this? And I would flat out tell them that even if the person who was my friend or acquaintance did that stuff they were saying, that didn't make me think any less of them. And that's the thing. A lot of my friends were considered problem kids because the bullying was so bad that when they would lash out and retaliate due to being pushed to that point, they were the ones who got in trouble, and they were the ones whose actions were displayed to everyone in class, but not the actions that led up to it. Now, there's a number of stories that my best friend from back then had shared with me when I talked about wanting to open up about the bullying I had received to my YouTube subscribers. But I'm not going to share them because even if she gave me permission, I never realized the extent it was because I only saw what was happening at school or the stories she would share with me about what happened at the school aftercare program or what may have happened on the bus. But the bullying for her never ended at school, and it wasn't just verbal or covert abuse tactics. It was physical. Awful. It feels, I don't know, it almost feels disingenuous for me to talk about my own trauma related to this when I know that her and so many of my other friends over the years have gone through so much more, while those people that did that stuff to them probably don't even realize what they did. In fact, part of what prompted me to start off the video of an update on Destination Unknown in this way is I don't want to explain specifics because I don't want people to get curious, but one of my own childhood bullies was recently arrested for a very horrific crime. And when I saw that, it saddened me. I know there's a common trend on Twitter where people will, have like the break the chains meme of their abuser dying, or that justice is served if they finally get punished for what was going on, or for something else. For me, I just hope for change. I hope for realization. I hope that people realize their own actions and they're able to correct it. I never want to see someone subjected to the same sort of abuse that they subjected others to. I never want to see that. And I think I am a weirdo and an alien for having this mentality. Okay, I know, there's a bunch of people who may be watching me who may have a religious philosophy, love thy neighbor and love your enemies, forgive your enemies. But when you go into those same churches, a lot of them are preaching about justice. They want to judge. And I don't. I really don't. And it took me a minute to process that this person that I had known all throughout my life in school, who was one of my main bullies, and apparently one of the bullies of my friend from back then as well, but I didn't realize it. Just to see that his life went, that he just threw away his life like that, it saddens me, and I don't know the best way to describe my emotions, because the person who told me about it was a parent of someone who went to the same school as me, and she seemed to fall more on the justice side of things, which again, I get it. I understand that people want others to feel their pain, but for me, I never want that for people. And again, I just feel like an alien. But that's just me. I hope he is able to get his life figured out while in prison. And I hope that there are people who are willing to go and talk to him, because now he is that lonely kid with no one to talk to. Not because he was bullied, but because of his own actions. Another story that left a big impact on me in regards to my elementary school friend is when I was briefly in the aftercare program for 5th grade because my mom had to go back to work because the economy went to crap. And one of the things that happened during those after school hours is there were 2 girls who were playing with my friend on the playground, and I recognized them. They were some of the acquaintances I was rather friendly with, talked to frequently enough to know that they hated my best friend. And I was confused. They were playing with her on the playground as if they were good friends and it didn't bother them. So I went up to them, and at first I was overjoyed that they were, being friends with my friend, and that, they were open to seeing that everyone else was wrong and that she is a very lovely person. And then they said, "Oh yeah, we actually really like her, but we're only friends with her during Kids Connection. If people knew we were friends with her during school hours, we wouldn't have any friends anymore." And this broke my heart, because they were so close to understanding. But I also couldn't fault them. My entire life throughout elementary school, I dealt with bullies constantly approaching me, trying to tear me away from this one friend specifically. And I received so much harassment for this, and so many people who would make comments to my face without that friend around about how much they didn't like her. So again, I couldn't fault them for not wanting to tear apart their social circles, but there was something in me that just went, that's wrong. That is so wrong. Because yes, they would still openly pretend to dislike her during school hours. I think it was the first time I had experienced two-faced behavior from the lens of the watcher. I was the person watching this unfold. I was the person who was friends with both parties, but also couldn't really tell people about it. And again, my best friend back in elementary school wasn't the only one I had bullies approach me with to this degree, but it's the one that's most impactful because it's the one where I saw the most of both ends. Now, something that is interesting to note is a lot of my bullies were into sports like kickball, and I love kickball. I am a very active person. At least I was until I developed plantar fasciitis last year due to working so much, and I kind of haven't been the same ever since. But back then, I constantly played kickball. Sometimes if my friend was all good, I'd go and either swing on the swings by myself or I'd go and play kickball. And the bullies knew I was pretty good as an athlete, so I think this is part of why they left me alone or why they wanted to befriend me. Because if you know anything about school dynamics, the athletes tend to be popular. Well, I was the nerd outcast weirdo athlete. I didn't really fit in anywhere. So I would still get to know the bullies on at least some level. They'd still make fun of me, but I'd at least still get to know some of their own interests and what was important to them. So elementary school, I kind of had this wide range of social circles, some of which I wasn't really welcomed in, but because those kids also didn't want to lose my connection, because if we had to do something in gym class or recess that involved, physical activities and team building, they wanted to make sure that I'd be willing to be on their team. And it's just fascinating thinking about it. How much I knew back then, how much I can't say, and just wishing that everyone who had those differences would be blessed and able to move on with their lives. That those who experienced all the abuse, that they were able to make it through and that they're still around today. And that those who were often the reason those people were feeling so bad and had such bad self-esteem, because yes, the bullying gave me horrible issues with my self-worth. I just hope those people that used their words as weapons, that they're no longer doing that. Now, the next thing that's coming to my mind isn't necessarily related to bullying, but it is a related trauma. I can't remember if it was 4th or 5th grade that she got a boyfriend, but that was the second time she had to sit down with me and have a conversation with me that I was no longer her top priority. Now, of course, that relationship was short-lived and it didn't last long, and I got to hear all the weird 5th grade shenanigans of what, a 5th grade relationship would look like then, and, trying to hide from parents, like trying to hide your relationship and stuff. But before she had this brief relationship, there was one time she befriended a new kid in school, and that kid became her new best friend. Now, oddly enough, that person would eventually become one of the few acquaintances I would occasionally talk to when I was friendless in 6th grade. But this was the beginning of an omen for me. You see, I'm not all that, interested in romantic relationships, but it's because of that I take losing someone as a best friend or priority status as all the more difficult. Now, despite this, it's worth noting that my friend was really mature for her age in regards to handling these situations. She knew that communication was the most important part of navigating these awkward and highly emotional conversations, but man, does it suck every time. And similarly enough, recently my online bestie started dating, and well, it's been the same scenario, which is bittersweet. I'm happy for her, but there is a small sting, especially as someone who doesn't have any friends in real life, that at the end of the day, I'm always the person that has to hand their loved ones off after caring for them, in some cases, many years, and not having someone to do that for me in return. But I've pretty much just accepted that this is likely the role I've been given in life, and I do have to accept it. Actually, on a related note, I did watch The Chosen earlier this year. I'm just waiting for season 5 to release on their website, and I love John as a character. I never would have imagined that they kind of just turned him into what you would assume to be a mad person, but boy does it fit. But I'm thinking of the line where he says I'm gonna look up the Bible verse real quick. I don't have it off the top of my head. Oh, John 3:29, the bride belongs to the bridegroom. The friend who attends the bridegroom waits and listens for him, and is full of joy when he hears the bridegroom's voice. That joy is mine, and it is now complete. I will say, when I heard that line in the show, it did make me feel a lot better, because that's a pretty good way to describe how the pattern has been with my friendships. I care for them until they need to move on into the next chapter of their life. So, I never would have thought I would have related to Creepy John, but actually, funny story, I ended up watching The Chosen because I saw a bunch of MAGA conservatives on Twitter upset about season 5 for some reason. Like, they were saying, don't watch The Chosen, it's woke propaganda. Which meant I obviously had to watch it. It's just like when a bunch of people on Twitter would talk that you shouldn't watch the documentary, I think it was called Watch the Water. It was some conspiracy theory thing about the COVID vaccine. If you tell me not to watch something because it's propaganda, I have to watch it. I can't help myself. It doesn't matter if it's on an obscure platform. I must go to the source material to see what upsets people. After watching seasons 1 through 4 of The Chosen, I don't know what upset them. What about it is woke? I don't get it. What about it is quote unquote woke? It's the Bible, but I guess Jesus was very woke, so. But back to my original point, considering the fact that my primary goal during the pandemic was to buy a home so I could sustain myself without a roommate, I've pretty much prepared myself for long-hauling loneliness. Not that I'm opposed to relationships, but just as I have talked about it on Twitter when it comes to romance and Expedition Uncharted, it's not going to be typical. Runa and Noka are about as cliche romantic couple as I'm willing to go, and while I love them, they are so foreign to me with how I'm supposed to write their interactions that I wrote a whole one-shot to just explain how they got together, to kind of figure out how the whole pining thing works between them, because their whole history is that they always had a crush on each other, but they never talk about their feelings. But she ended up dating this refugee from Frekutan who was there because Kamaris, in the middle series between Destination Unknown and Expedition Uncharted, the history is that Queen Lascura was alive, and she needed to weed out Guvenok's forces that were still in Frekutan to take them out so authority could be restored to the real leader of Frekutan. But when this happened, there was a bunch of conflict between the Kamarian occupiers and the Frekuti resistance movement. And there were extremists within the Frekuti resistance movement that ended up turning on the Kamarians allied with Queen Lascura because they didn't see them as any different, and it caused a bunch of chaos, and this history will be examined through Oxtapia's lens, since it is her specific childhood trauma. Basically, he ended up on Mediterranean because he was one of the refugees taken out of there when the capital was destroyed. But because this guy was open about how he felt, Runa's oh boy, because Runa is boy crazy. She is the protagonist in the middle series called Renegade Underground, and I've never known how to write her because she's a lot like Akita and Kike, but she's also more feminine and somehow even more headstrong than Akita is. But the other personality trait about her is not only is she a tomboy, she is boy crazy. And I've never known how to write that element, but that's how she ends up together with this other guy, and Noka's heartbroken because he was trying to work up the courage, but with Komogi's help to, have something happen there, and it doesn't happen originally. So I never knew how they actually got together, because Renegade Underground leaves off with Runa still with that other guy. But in Expedition Uncharted, she's married to Noka, and I'm I don't know how they got together. I just know that they were always going to get together, and that at this point in the story they are. I wasn't figuring out what happened in between, aside from them dealing with Komogi. So it was a very fun character exploration. But, of course, me being me, Noka and Komogi ended up having more chemistry because Komogi has chemistry with everyone, no matter where he goes. It's also a funny story. So, in the other world, which is a lore concept I may or may not explain sometime, Komogi and Noka were actually a thing. In their story, Noka was actually a part of Lozakron's float, which is where he pops up in Diving Bell to talk to Lozakron. He was one of the spouses. And that change actually happened years ago. I don't know when I officially took him out of the royal float, but I know he's been set to be married to Runa for a long time. It was originally Jasper, ironically enough. Runa and Jasper were originally a thing. But then I wrote Jasper out of Renegade Underground, and now he doesn't show back up until the Watcher arc in Expedition Uncharted. But again, I don't want to get too deep into spoilers. I really like talking about my story and what ended up leading to the development of certain plot points and characters. But yeah, Runa and Noka, I didn't understand romance, so I forced myself to write a cheesy romantic one shot that turned into 20,000 words. Yeah. One of these days I will get the audiobook out, but I still haven't received all the lines that I need, so I need to go around and remind people, hey, do you still want to be on this project? Yeah, but yeah, that was a long segue. Back to my original point. For me, I've always pictured myself as moving in with a college roommate, and then we'd be forever roommates and raise kids together. I guess that's not a very straight thought, but that was always my thought from probably late middle school, if not early high school. I never really saw myself as getting married, though I have been in a couple of relationships. They didn't work out for a reason. I kind of learned I'm just not really attracted to men. That's what I mean by it being so difficult emotionally for me, always being the one to hand off my friends to others. I don't have a typical romantic fantasy like so many people do. The most I can see is being queer platonic partners with someone, or like having a domestic partnership. But the other thing that I would see there is having exclusivity with that relationship. And it's so hard to describe this to people. I remember the first time I mentioned it to my mom in high school, and she said, "Oh, so you just want a friend?" And I'd be, "Well, not exactly." Like, I think back then I said, "I think I want like a best friend and we'd be forever best friends." But I feel like what I'm saying is that I want the commitment of a romantic relationship without a majority of the physical stuff. Like I said, I'm not opposed to romantic actions. I'm not opposed to some of the physical stuff. Like if I was in a relationship with someone, I would still cater to their needs. But to me, it just doesn't come naturally. It really doesn't. In fact, I think it's more that the boundary between friendship and romance is rather blurred. Because I'm someone who I look at a bunch of cultural norms, and it's only really in Western culture where kissing's kind of taboo or like exclusive to only romantic relationships. Because if you look into some cultures in Europe or West Asia, it's actually seen as offensive if you're not willing to give a quick peck on the cheek as a greeting. It's cultural. And I feel like there is a part of purity culture that has completely erased platonic gestures of love. But people, they just instantly think about kissing and they think about sex, and no, I don't really see it that way. Actually, I think I had this conversation with my mom about the whole like college roommate scenario, which by the way, I never ended up having a college roommate. But I think I had this conversation with her about 3 months into my first relationship. She comes into my room and she thinks she's finally going to get girl talk out of me. Because you know me, I am like the biggest tomboy ever and I don't do stereotypical girl things. So my mom was really excited to have an actual like womanly conversation with me about romance and boys and what to expect. And she's like, "So have you kissed him yet?" And I'm like, oh yeah. And she's like, so like, how'd it feel? Like, what was it? And I'm like, oh, I didn't feel anything. And my mom, she just stares at me in shock. Like her eyes went wide. And then she had this look of this is what I picture it in hindsight, but I didn't really have the words for it back then. She goes, "Oh no, don't tell me this child is gay." It freaked her out, and I didn't understand why she was like that. But she paused for a moment, and after she collected herself, she went, "I guess it is that way for some people." And she didn't really press me on it much more, but that's when she was kind of asking, like, where do I see myself? It's weird to describe, because when I have dated the two people that I have, the whole thought in my mind is very logical. Like, you date someone, if you're compatible, then, like, the goal is to look to being life partners. But that's the thing for me. I always saw it through a logical and mathematical lens. Now, if anyone from my high school days is watching this, things might make sense now. I thought people picked their crushes from their social circles. They would pick a friend that they liked talking to, and then the next step would be to just obsessively learn everything about them, have any excuse to talk to them, and then, like, just think about them. So, that's what I thought I had to do. It was pretty much compulsory heterosexuality. When you get down to it, it was very much this is what everyone around me is doing. So I was trying to figure out how it works. So I'm like, oh, so you pick a guy and then they become your obsession. So the reason I was a stalker was that's what I was perceiving other people's actions to be. Like, and I'd like give them the death stare too. I thought it was a competition because that's how other girls described it. I thought it was a competition to stare into the depths of their soul, and I didn't know I was making them uncomfortable. It was like a game to me, but it never dawned on me that, like, you're supposed to do these actions and then you end up in a relationship. It wasn't until, like, my first boyfriend ended up asking if we were boyfriend and girlfriend after a couple dates did it process to me, oh, there's a second step involved in here. Because for me, I was just fine with this weird, twisted, warped understanding of how romance worked. Like, that was my obsession. Not the people I was trying to show interest in, but trying to understand the other girls who were having this obsession. It's so stupid when I think about it now. And I would like to apologize to any of the guys that I have stalked over the years. That was, I want to say it wasn't my intention, but it was more that I perceived those actions to be what people who have genuine romantic feelings do. That I just romanticized concept behind it. Oh man, it's so creepy. I'm not ashamed of my past self, though. It was a learning experience, so I could talk about it now. Oh, man. But yeah, when I would talk about, like, my ideal, like, future that I'd have, I would always kind of just, picture a female best friend and, we just raise kids together. I don't know why that's weird. I don't know why people look at that and they're like, you are a sinner from the depths of hell. You are homosexual. And I'm just like, I don't experience sexual attraction. What is with you guys? So, I mean, it in some ways, I'm like, yeah, I probably am gay, but it's not. And you try to explain this to religious folks, and they're like, they put a crucifix in front of you, and it's like, begone the spirit of homosexuality. Because, I look at that and go, but I don't experience sexual attraction. And that's a foreign concept to people, but it's the truth. I really don't. In fact, my coworker was talking to me one day after her lunch, and she was saying, oh man, I didn't want to come back to lunch because I had this really steamy scene in this book I was reading, and just wasn't ready to go back to lunch. And I was confused because I'm like, well, why? Like, why can't you just go back to work? You were just reading a book. They're just words on a page. They can't affect you, right? And she's like, wait, what? And I'm like, what? She's like, it's a steamy scene. And I went, yeah, like, the characters, yeah, they're doing the dirty tango. I don't see why that is distressing to you. And then she pulled me aside and she went, I didn't want to come back to work because I was having feelings, because the words were making me have feelings. And it was in that moment I realized, oh, so the reason people make fun of people who read porn for the plot is because I'm literally the person who would do that. Like, I'm literally the person who would look at these sorts of scenarios in a book and I'd analyze it from a character arc perspective, or how that display of love or how that display of behaviors, and sometimes it's not out of love if you know like some darker scenes in narratives, how it shows more about their character, how when it comes to vulnerability, how do they act in the physical. It never once dawned on me that people might be having a crisis if they're reading that stuff, because that don't affect me in that way. So yeah, if you want to type in the comics, Artixie reads porn for the plot. Yeah, I mean, I would. If I wouldn't choose to read something like that normally, but if it's presented in an already established narrative, I would probably analyze the scene like, oh, isn't it interesting how this character, despite being such a rugged and confident individual, is kind of insecure in the bedroom. Like, I would look at character analysis like that, and I find it interesting how authors would imagine their characters in that specific position. But I don't know. I must be weird because, yeah, that's how dense I am. In fact, I can't believe I'm about to admit to this, but I didn't know how the dirty tango worked until I was 19. I was in a class in college and I had 3 table partners. The person who sat next to me, we're gonna call him Trump because he was the biggest Trumpy ever and also somehow even more innocent than me. And then the 2 people across to us we're going to refer to as #1 Hillary supporter and I want to say a stoner anarchist. It was weird. We joked that we were the political compass, but the 2 on the other side of the table were very, very open about their intimate lives. And there was one day in class where they said something, and it just dawned on me, where I went, oh, that's disgusting. And like, they're having a field day seeing my reaction, and it actually didn't dawn on to Mr. Trumpy next to me, but I don't know, I had a crisis over this where at first I went, oh, I always wondered how the sperm got to the egg, but ew! And oh, I feel like such an idiot. I remember in 10th grade, there was this one time that someone had mentioned that their sister thought that 2 people were just slept in the same bed together, and then overnight the sperm would, like, trickle through the bed sheets and then, somehow fertilize the egg. And I sat there during that going, yeah, that's funny, right? Well, also going, oh, I have no idea how it works. So I am very blessed that the 2 people I did end up dating over the years were very decent individuals, because I could have easily been taken advantage of in a way that would be extremely traumatizing. Yeah, because again, I didn't know how it worked until I was an adult. And not even like right away. Like, I was 19. I can't emphasize this enough. I was 19 when I learned how sex works. So then, of course, it naturally became an interest of mine when it came to fiction, because at that point I went, well, I have years of catching up to do on learning something, and since I'm someone who is very eager to learn about things, I'm always in the pursuit of knowledge, I wanted to know, okay, so what is this? Why do I understand nothing about it? What can I know in the future so that I am no longer confused when people talk about this stuff or make jokes? There was this one time last year when I was thinking back to my 7th grade choir class, and back then the kids would laugh at this joke my choir teacher made. And it was, you can't have your hands in your pockets when you go to smile to your friends and family out in the audience, because if they see your hands in your pockets and smiley kids, they're going to get the wrong idea. And all the kids were laughing. All the kids but me. But oh no, me, a decade later, last year, started laughing at work because I finally understood what he meant. I am so slow, but I finally understood. Why would you say that to a bunch of 7th graders, though? Man. But anyway, back to the timeline I'm trying to get into. In 5th grade, my friend's priority would be determined for me. You see, she had to move to a completely different state. I remember when she told me this was confirmed to be happening, since in the previous year, the plan fell through. Though I was in gym class when she told me, and I hugged her, saying how much I did not want her to leave. I'd enter 6th grade with pretty much no friends. You see, all the outcasts and weirdos and everyone in between, the people who I got closest to in elementary school, for some reason they were all the ones who moved. And this one would hit me the hardest. I think it's the people who have the hardest time connecting with others who are the ones who often move around a lot because their home life may not be the most secure, or there's a lot of changes going on, because again, moving is hard on everyone involved. And this was something I feel may have been all the more common back then, since I was in school near the end of the housing boom and the entirety of the 2008 financial crisis. While I stayed at the same school district my whole life, I sadly had a similar experience socially to those kids that constantly moved around, because I never got to develop a true lifelong friendship. In 6th grade, I can't say the loneliness bothered me much, as I was often drawing or daydreaming stories in my head, but my attempts to make more meaningful conversations with other kids always fell through. One such issue was getting along better with boys than with girls, but due to middle school being, well, middle school. It's an era in life where kids are kind of afraid to talk to the opposite sex unless they were romantically interested. This already made my position unfavorable socially. I was known as the Pokemon kid, and back then, liking Pokemon, especially as a biological girl, was a one-way ticket to social isolation. And the guys I talked to that liked Pokemon didn't really want to be friends outside of talking about that specific thing. I didn't have anyone to share hobbies with and physically do activities together. While Taekwondo and cross country allowed me to have some stability socially, the friends I made were never in my own grade or school. And in Girl Scouts, I was the troop outcast. The one person I had who liked similar things to me in the troop sadly moved away in the middle of the school year, if I recall correctly, and the other girls, it didn't used to be a problem, but I preferred to hang out in the troop as a form of parallel play. I didn't like the activities they preferred to do, so I would kind of just do my own thing when the opportunity arose, and I was happy to do my own thing. If they were happy, I was happy. But I think the troop leader started making the other girls feel bad for not including me in stuff, when in reality, it was never their fault. So they kept asking me what I wanted to do, but in a way that was forced and fake, and I knew what I wanted to do was the stuff the Boy Scouts were doing, and it just wasn't compatible with the personality types in my troop. My favorite memories in Girl Scouts were the area-wide events open to all the troops, since the friends I did make who were people that got along with me happened to be in the homeschool group. So I'd hang out with them during Mall-a-Mania or the YMCA sleepovers simply because they did the cool stuff and they had similar interests and personalities. Just to put into perspective how restricted I felt in my own troop, there was this one time Hot Topic was one of the shops open during the mall event, and I saw Pokemon stuff in there, so I went to check it out. Then the girls in my troop ended up pulling me by the wrist out of there saying, I'm sorry, I just can't see someone like you in this store. And I don't know what the problem was. I learned later that Hot Topic has a reputation for druggies and goths, but hey, I just wanted to look at the Pokemon stuff. Also, who were they to determine what kind of person I was? I mean, it's probably because, again, as I stated before, I was a very innocent kid, but seriously, I just wanted to look at Pokemon stuff. Thinking about my life in grade school, I imagine the loneliness never got to me in any negative way is because I was always able to stay positive, even if I had my low moments. It was also a completely different world back then, as this was before I had a phone and my screen time on the computer was limited to 1 hour a day. But ever since coming to social media after high school, it's amplified just how plain and boring my life is compared to a lot of other people's social illusion they have on their pages. The highlight for me back in middle school was having few but fulfilling and engaging interactions throughout the year in real life, but back then, I could at least expect to have those. Like at Girl Scout camp, it was very easy for me to make a week-long best friend. But again, this was the era before cell phones were commonplace for tweens and teens, so I was never able to keep their contact after the week ended, despite some of my core memories revolving around camp. Actually, I was just reminded of this from well over a decade ago, and I'm pretty sure that was the year we had Harry Potter Week as our camp-wide event. Also, despite it being totally random, just as the official sorting hat during the Chicago Harry Potter tour sorted me, I was put in Gryffindor that week at camp. And if you know me, I consider myself to be a massive coward, so Gryffindor has never made sense to me. But whenever I talk to people about how I personally perceive myself, everyone always dismisses me and goes, "What do you mean? You have the heart of a lion." And you know what my response to that always was? Yeah, you see that thing right over there that I should be doing. So that thing you're currently telling me is not me is none of your business. Like I always say that I relate to Jonah from the Bible, but I'm not joking when I say that my entire life is like a mirror to those 4 small chapters in the holy book. So I just always use it as a joke, but nope. Everyone always says I'm a lion. In fact, this is one of the 2 big reasons I chose the name Leo in 2020. The other one being that Leo is my star sign because I was born 3 weeks early and I was born the day before the Leo-Virgo cusp, and I've always related way more to Virgo. And I kind of like had this joke that the timing of my birth was a massive mistake, despite my parents saying I came out of the womb that day eyes wide open and eager to explore the world. I literally went, "Ha God, you want me to be a lion so bad? Fine, I'll be your lion. I don't believe in astrology. Horoscopes are stupid. But why, oh why did you make me a Leo? I'm nothing like Leo, but fine. So the next time you send a whale, I will have teeth." And me saying I'm not a Leo is because I didn't view myself as prideful, all while telling God he made a mistake. May not have been the brightest moment of my life. But I think I got ahead of myself about my crash out in 2020, so I need to circle back to 2010 to explain why a lot of things happened the way they did. In 7th grade, I made the most impactful connection on my life to this day. It was band class on the first day of school, and there was a girl who was in my section who wasn't there the previous year. And why this stuck out to me is we were told back in 5th grade that if we didn't join band in 6th grade, we couldn't join later. Because at that point, the other kids would have known the basics of their instrument, and the teacher couldn't spend time individually with the new student to get them to catch up. So it was weird to see a kid that not only I didn't see in band in the previous year, but I've never seen around school before. But on that first day of school, I more or less kept it as a mental note, and then I saw her in my choir class, at the end of the day. I can't remember if I approached her that first day of school or it took me about a week of gauging whether or not I wanted to approach. Because again, back in 6th grade, I was friendless. I don't think I can emphasize that enough. Yes, I talked to people. It was very easy to talk to me, but no one ever wanted to get to know me. But one day in choir class, I ended up approaching her when we had a bit of free time, and this encounter would change the trajectory that I thought my life was heading forever. It's hard to say how long it took for things to kick off with this new friendship, but when I say that this was the most impactful connection I would ever make, I truly do mean it. This is the only time in my life, despite it only lasting for 2 very short years, in which I'd have someone to share my own hobbies and interests in, and also be interested in these other person's hobbies and interests. And she was interested in getting to know me on the same level that I was willing to get to know her. Anyway, we were joined to the hip not long after we first started talking. After all, she was really into Pokemon, and now my friend from elementary school, she was into Pokemon, but not to the same extent that this new person was. And she even let me borrow her Leaf Green game. Since, again, because my parents did not come from wealth, I got into the gaming systems very late. In fact, my childhood gaming system was a Sega Genesis that my dad got years ago, but sadly my brother ended up breaking it very, very early on in my life. And then the Game Boy Advance that we had was a hand-me-down from one of my mom's friends. And we couldn't afford any of the Pokemon games that were on the Game Boy Advance, aside from the Pokemon trading card video game that was for the Game Boy Color, I believe it was, because they were selling that for like $10 at GameStop. But I cannot emphasize enough that we did not have money. My parents, back when they got me the DS, they didn't realize that a good quality game was worth way more than 10 cheap games of the same value overall. So it took me many, many months once I got my DS to even get a Pokemon game, which was frustrating. But I started on like the gaming side of Pokemon very late into my life. So when she offered to lend me her Leaf Green game, I think that was the first time I had experienced not just something genuine, but, someone also sharing a part of themselves in just a very genuine way. I don't know how else to describe it. This was a very unique experience for me. Clarification, this might be the second time this occurred. I remembered in hindsight after I recorded this that my friend from elementary school actually saved up a bunch of the currency in science class to get me Pokemon Diamond because someone put it up for auction for that fake currency. So she got me a Pokemon game, and then this other friend allowed me to experience a former generation game that I wouldn't be able to otherwise. So similar experience, but also different things, since one was my own experience to embark on and the other one was someone sharing their personal Pokemon file because they needed a bit of help, and in a way to allow me to experience something I wouldn't have otherwise. Actually, a slight derail now that I'm remembering this. When that friend from elementary school got me the Pokemon Diamond game, I at first felt really bad because, again, it was expensive with the fake currency that we had, and while her homeroom teacher was the one who did this sort of fake currency auction, he was only my science teacher, so I had very limited resources. But, I'm not feeling worthy of such a large gift like that. And she goes, no, my love for you is more important than any Grebel. And I still think about that sometimes because, again, and rejection is a very consistent theme in your life. It's very small stuff like that that keep you going. And the other thing that I remember is we used to have a community expo of businesses that our band would kind of help run. And there were a bunch of free samples that were given out by a lot of the caterers who were wanting to promote their businesses. And my friend went up to one of the booths that had chocolate covered Peeps, and she went to grab one, and then there was a second one that was stuck to it, and the lady said, oh, you can keep both of them. And she then thinks, oh, well, I'll give it to my crush as a bit of a gift. And then the lady says, oh, they were meant to be together. It's fine. I don't want to separate them. So then she walks up to me and she gives me this Peep, and I don't really like Peeps, but I'm not going to deny the gift. And she tells me that story, and she goes, yeah, after that, it's like, I'm just gonna give this to my best friend instead. And I will never forget the time she chose me over a guy. It meant so much to me. You guys have no idea. And I ended up eating the Peep, and it was good. And then I learned Peeps weren't as disgusting as I thought they were. But yeah, those two memories do keep me going sometimes when I am going through some loneliness episodes. Even though neither of them are in my life anymore, it's small things like that help. Anyway, the friend from middle school ended up letting me play the leaf green game, and that was the start of us pretty much sharing each other's lives in a more in-depth way than other friendships that I have had in the past and ever since. And not long after that, we kind of just consolidated all of our interests into one. It's kind of hard to describe. She was really into reading. I was not into reading. In fact, I actively despise reading despite loving to write. It's a really weird oxymoron. But one day she was reading this series called Warriors, and she said, I think you'd really like this one. You should give it a try. And I was like, I don't read, and I also don't like cats, so I never wanted to pick it up. But one day I was in the library for one of my classes and I noticed the Warrior series on the bookshelf. And I thought to myself, I wouldn't normally do this. But I do know my friend was really interested in this and she was kind of disappointed when I did not want to give it a shot. So I'm going to read this and I'm going to surprise her. That following week, I ended up reading the entire first arc. I fell in love with this series. And it's the first and probably only time I've ever been into a specific book and hooked on it. Now, the first book of Divergent and then The Fault in Our Stars, I also had a similar focus and attention on those stories. But Warriors is a very specific and narrow pipeline to where my life would eventually head. Back in 6th grade, I really wanted to be an engineer, but as some of you probably know from how I've vented over the years on occasion, is I didn't have the money to go to college for that, and I felt really insecure in high school about my math skills. But that's why I didn't end up becoming an engineer, is I just felt so inadequate. But if I never met this friend back in middle school, I don't even think I would have ever gotten into digital art. So after I started reading the Warrior series, she started to introduce me to a program called GIMP. It was free, and oddly enough, it was on our school computers. But because my parents were very strict about my computer access, as well as any sort of program that didn't come from an official big name company, I couldn't download it. So my friend took matters into her own hands and got a flash drive from her dad, downloaded GIMP onto it, and then gifted it to me. Like I couldn't escape. She was going to get me into this part of her own life one way or the other, and I still have the flash drive, but I can't remember where I put it, but I used it for a very, very long time, even into college. And then after I started getting into digital art, that was when she wanted to talk about doing some sort of animation together. You see, we stumbled across a series called SSS Warrior Cats, and at first I thought it was a legit Japanese anime, and I couldn't figure it out why there wasn't anything past episode 2. But I eventually learned that it was made by some guy who was just looking to do a hobby proof of concept project for his own. I don't know if it was like a portfolio or just out of his own interest, but it really inspired me. Back in elementary school, I was a huge Sonic fan. And if any of you know how Sonic X ends, we don't know if Chris survives, and I had this whole idea in my head of what might happen to Chris after he goes on the spaceship, and my mom said, well, why not you animate the end of the story one day? So I had an interest in animation from my 8-year-old brain, but I never thought about once putting it into reality or that it was even possible. So, with this gifted flash drive and a new friend, we ended up forming a very short-lived but small, childish animation studio called Soup in a Can Studios. And briefly, we also had a third friend involved who was into Warriors, and we were going to make a Blue Stars Prophecy series, and then we decided to pivot to Power of Three since that was the most recently completed arc in Warriors. The third friend who was involved, she ended up dropping out because reality hit her how long and tedious animation was as a medium, and she pretty much told us that it was never going to get off the ground. But my friend and I were still delusional. As a new Pokemon game was starting to come out, and we were looking at the leaks from Japan, since back then, Japan got the game months before the United States did. And we were developing theories about what we felt like the game was going to be about. This game was Pokemon Black and White, and we started developing our own Pokemon Mystery Dungeon fan fiction based around our speculation with this story. I've talked about it before, but Aphliana, who is the Queen of Mediterania in Destination Unknown, in the origins for Destination Unknown, she is from this fan fiction as a Cinchino, and I wanted to make her design honor her origins, which is how she turned out how she is today. But back then, Aphliana was this, I don't know if it was like village chief or if I called her the village guardian, but she was kind of the equivalent of a town mayor. We created 2 Eevee characters. Hers was named Dawn, who was a happy-go-lucky Eevee with a slightly lighter color palette, maybe just a tiny bit ditzy and headstrong. And she had a sun medallion to represent the day. And mine was an Eevee named Dusk, who was aloof, kind of edgy, and a bit more calculative. Like, she'd have to drag Dawn out of situations Dawn would end up in, and she had a moon medallion to represent the night. And the story went that one day Dawn found Dusk passed out in the forest, and Dusk is confused when she wakes up because she was just escaping a forest fire with her friends, but her friends are nowhere to be seen. And, you know, the forest, it's alive, it's better than ever. And Dawn just thinks that Dusk had a really bad dream, and she offers to take Dusk to Houndoom's dojo, where she can get some rest, and eventually they form an exploration team. Houndoom's dojo was our equivalent of Wigglytuff's guild, but edgy and physically abusive. Because you know how Chatot is, you know, the capitalist who's taking all your money? Well, Houndoom was just, you know, literally scarring all of his apprentices. And we had this idea of a twist hero with Mightyena, who was pretty much in Grovile's role. The twist was she was Houndoom's ex-lover who just wanted him to turn away from his abusive tactics. And Houndoom has a Houndour kid, and I'm pretty sure Mightyena was supposed to be his mother. But I'm now kind of wondering, did a Ditto pretend to be Mightyena, and is that how Houndoom went so dark? Like, even now, I haven't thought about this story all that much since I was trying to honor the origins with Destination Unknown, but even now I'm kind of thinking that there's some stuff we could have done with that. Either way, we also had this idea of, you know how in Explorers of Sky, spoilers by the way, but you know how the player characters from the future, our totally original idea was that Dusk would be from the past, and the forest had burned down decades ago, but it has since regrown. But that's one of the overarching mysteries and one of the twists within the plot. The other mystery was that once Dusk became a member of the dojo, at night, fires would break out, and the only lead anyone had was this shadowy figure, as if a part of the fire itself was seen by everyone who reported the scene. And the big twist reveal about it was that Dusk was the one behind it this entire time. Now, if anyone is familiar with my channel, they would know that a dark, shadowy figure that represents fire is a frequent character who's been on my channel and even from some of my animations before the Artixie channel. I've always referred to him as the doppelganger, but his role over the years has shifted quite a bit. This gets more into spoilers for modern day Destination Unknown, but he's actually the illusionary factor of the fire element. And it's weird to explain, but again, this is spoilers for the lore. So each element has a duality to it. The elemental being that is naturally more destructive is the one that holds the illusionary side of things. The best way to describe it is what you see in front of you and the world around you are physical manifestations, but simply looking at something. He represented like what fire looks like in particular, but without the properties that would physically impact the environment. And then, as we've seen from the kerosene meme, there is a counterpart to him, which is the physical side of the fire element. And this one, despite being more aligned to creation, is the one that holds the destructive property. But it stems all the way back from this story we created in 2010 to 2011, trying to speculate about Pokemon Black and White, which I don't even think I've gotten to yet, but you know how in the Rise of Darkrai, Dialga and Palkia get into a space-time battle? Our idea was Reshiram and Zekrom would get into a battle about truth and ideals, and that caused the world to happen, basically. I don't know, Arceus was involved at some point. I can't really remember his role, aside from Dusk had to confront him at one point, but it was a very loose understanding of what we heard the game was about and trying to fit it into our whole Pokemon Mystery Dungeon narrative, which was like our self-inserts, but it was like each other's self-inserts when I think back on it. Like, I think Dusk was more representative of my friend, and then Dawn was more representative of me, despite our characters being each other's. Like, it's kind of hard to describe, but I think it's a product of this sort of intimate friendship where your interests and hobbies are one, and therefore the thing you're most interested in is going to be each other, not necessarily like yourself. And it's funny because when I think about all the different songs that I wrote for the Heroes of Darkness theme song, which back then I think it was called Heroes of Dawn and Dusk, but it's always talking about the doppelganger entity. I don't think I realized it back in 2010 and 2011, but the doppelganger is Wilfrey from Drawn to Life. And if you have played Drawn to Life, you have played the Christian allegory you didn't realize was a Christian allegory. Wilfrey is Satan, or Lucifer, in the game. And he was a character I was really obsessed with when I was friendless in 6th grade. Not because, like, you know, like you're drawn to, like, the Prince of Darkness type trope, but because I really liked his background music, and I like his antagonism, how he was just a character who was evil. I'd have to go back and replay both Drawn to Life games, and I don't want to get too far into it without getting into spoilers, because if you've played Drawn to Life, it is an experience. You have to experience it. I can tell you how impactful the game was to me, but you do not want the ending spoiled for you, and you have to play the original copy. Don't play the 2-in-1 package. The ending is different, and it's like not as meaningful. As you guys who've played it, you'll know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to bring it up, but Drawn to Life was a really huge inspiration from me that I kind of just forgot about when we were going through the whole like Reshiram, Zekrom, Truth and Ideals speculation. But I can't really remember entirely what I referred to the Shadow Darkness entity as. I know he wasn't like referred to as Wilfrey. I just know that his whole primary objective was destruction, and it is the embodiment of a concept in my story known as the Sandbox, or the Other Worlds, in which these doppelganger entities from scrapped concepts and timelines are trying to usurp the timeline and, you know, have their own stories, their scrapped narratives told in place of the current one that is trying to be told. And just as weird shadow selves go, this friend would move away after 8th grade, and I'd still keep the stories and collaborations that we had together on my heart, but not really realizing that I would continue to do digital art and animation, as well as the story that eventually became Destination Unknown, partially because it still kept an aspect of her memory intact. In some ways, I feel like I subconsciously knew this was going on because it is worked into the lore of the story, but it didn't hit me that this was something going on in my subconsciousness until I posted Destination Unknown and I realized we were no longer friends on Facebook. It hit me in a way that I wasn't expecting. I hadn't spoken to her in, I think it was about a year and a half since then, and it's one of those things where you look back on it and go, wow, I should have tried better, because I'm so used to people coming into my life for a very short season and then they leave, that it just doesn't really dawn on me to keep reaching back out. And again, I grew up during a time where I didn't really have a cell phone. I did in 8th grade, but it had very, very limited minutes. So I asked my friends to only text me or call me if something was necessary or it was a event that they were planning, and to just text me the date and time and I'd be there in person. So when you don't have the opportunity to develop proper social skills in childhood and your teenage years, you just don't have them for adulthood, and no one tells you that it's so much harder to make friends as an adult. So I share this story to explain what happened with Destination Unknown, because I went into an identity crisis in 2020 because of this, although I don't think I was consciously processing that was the core issue at the time. Back then, and again, understand that I'm starting with what the core issue was to say that the blame is entirely on me. So what I am about to say, I'm not trying to put the blame anywhere else, but when I posted Destination Unknown, I kind of felt ignored. I guess I hadn't realized that being in a community that features animals with magic powers, I guess it never dawned on me that people weren't really interested in human series. So I was confused when it never took off in the algorithm. And I was confused that I had people who would consistently comment up until release, and then those same people kind of disappeared, or people who I was more than mutuals with, like I talked to not regularly but occasionally in private, and it would be like a both ways interaction. Like, it wasn't just like a one side parasocial dynamic. It was like what I thought was genuine networking connections. And I was confused because one of the things that I really liked about the animation community was seeing all of these other creators who had their own series in the comment sections of other series. Because part of how I found a lot of the series that I would eventually come to enjoy was through the comment section of other series, or the algorithm that would suggest them as similar, because back then the algorithm promoted what other channels were like watching. That's how they kind of determined what similar content was, based on what other creators were consuming. And I had people who would talk about Destination Unknown publicly. They might promote it to their fans, but they wouldn't comment on the episode itself or really acknowledge it outside of that. And to me, it put me in a really dark place. I'm just gonna be completely honest about it. It made me feel worthless. And again, I'm not putting the blame on anyone else. The root problem was I kept running with this story, and then when I realized that the person who helped start it all was no longer in my life and I had no way to contact her again, it broke me. It broke me in a way that is very hard to describe. But I also didn't have any other real connections that I could, fill the void with. And it hurt. It really hurt. And I have no one to blame but myself, because I wasn't processing what was going on internally. So on February 28th, 2020, I stopped progress on episode 2, and I wouldn't touch it again for almost 4 years. My original spark had completely died, and a lot of people in the community I was there for and talked to amicably in private over the 2 years I worked on the episode, since they didn't comment on the episode itself or even congratulated me on getting it out, I mean, why wouldn't I spiral? Again, the fault is entirely on me, but so not only could I not share, this big accomplishment with the one person I wanted to the most, while other series had other creators in their comment section at least congratulating them on the episode, it didn't happen for me. And again, I don't want to put the blame on others. At the end of the day, it's my fault for thinking my series would appeal to a community that was only really familiar with animal series with fantasy tropes. My story is a sci-fantasy mystery with humans. It wasn't going to be promoted as similar to the algorithm. And my style it's different. It's intentionally based on early 2000s cartoons, which again is very different from the anime style most people are trying to emulate. And I know it's hard to talk about. I'm just expressing my honest thoughts about what happened and, explain my thought process at the time, the emotions that were going on. And again, I am not saying this in any way to put the blame on anyone but myself. This was something I should have worked out in therapy a long time ago. But from my perspective on how things played out, it just felt like the entire world was against me. Kind of like how it feels like every time I try to make this video, I write a script, and update is like clear, concise, and I can finally record it, something happens. And again, I can't talk about the stuff that's happened. Just like I had to ask my elementary school friends permission to talk about some of the things, and then only to realize that it was way worse than even I had realized back then. I can't share my honest thoughts, my feelings, my reasonings for them, the lessons I have learned where I was wrong and how I'm going to do better in the future without permission of so many other people. Like even the story with my best friend from 7th and 8th grade, I had to be very brief in that section because I realized that a lot of that stuff that, is impactful memories to me and my character and what helped shape me are stuff that I probably just shouldn't air out to the internet, even if it's lighthearted, even if it's, very happy memories that I doubt would matter. It's still not something that's just for me to share. But I think the moral of the story that I learned is, at the end of the day, everyone means so much more to me than I feel like I mean to them. And that is a really hard pill to swallow, even to this day. And I feel like it just stems from my lack of socialization on the internet and with digital devices, because again, I didn't really have the privilege to have the latest tech. I wouldn't have a smartphone until I bought one myself in 2016 for Pokemon Go, because my track phone wasn't compatible because it was so cheap. But with that said, and with my honest feelings shared on the matter, I do want to talk about why Destination Unknown is important to me and why the identity crisis hit closer to home than anyone realized and is a bit difficult to talk about. I know it's a common joke in the community to say how the main character tends to be some sort of exaggerated self-insert of the creator behind it. For me, I know people have thought that about Akita. One of the comments I did get from a fan at one point, because I did kind of open up to them about what was going on since they asked what happened to Destination Unknown and why I was silent. They thought Akita was my self-insert because it was a community trope. And that's the thing. She's not. She never has been. In fact, the self-insert is extremely literal. It's the creator. When I brought up Drawn to Life earlier, my story, I hadn't realized, was extremely inspired by that game, despite it having been mostly in my memories and subconscious over the years. But when I played the game sometime in the early pandemic, I went, oh, the eternal light is the eternal flame. And I got the idea of the creator being me as a joke from this game. I had originally thought that I made it as a joke in that way because originally Destination Unknown was a bit of a commentary in my own understanding of how the universe worked. So in a way, it wasn't that I was putting myself in the place of God, but rather trying to understand how God would create a world and how he would write stories and how those stories would intertwine with one another. And then the most important question that was on my mind as a Catholic was, why would an all-loving creator turn away the people crying out to him on Judgment Day? In 2020, part of where my crash out came from was understanding a lot of these questions on a level that I don't think anyone really should have to contemplate. I think there's a reason people go insane when they try to comprehend the concept of infinity. This was an existential question in somewhat, having to empathize with a concept most wouldn't want to empathize with. It does stuff to your mental state. Because while a lot of people write a story more in a form of like expressing themselves and, their inner thoughts, and imagination is a healthy way to explore darker topics and themes, for me, it was always a pursuit of the truth, if you will. I've mentioned it multiple times before, but people have asked me in the past what inspired the title behind Destination Unknown, and I've only ever given a half truth out about it. One day I was watching Destination Truth by Josh Gates, and I thought, man, I wish I could use the title for this show for my story, because truth is kind of the destination of what the characters are looking for. But back then, the title of the series was called Insipid, and insipid was my word for sin within the story, since I didn't actually want to refer to sin as sin, since in my own weird egotistical world of my creation, I still wanted to keep things quote unquote unique to me. And where I got the vocabulary word insipid from was either right before or during our world religions unit in American literature class. And I loved the world religions unit in American Lit. I mentioned it before, but I grew up in the Catholic Church. I wasn't born into it, but my dad got back into the church around when I was in first or second grade, and I may go into it a bit later in the video, but the Catholic and Christian teachings actually weren't the first influence when it came to spirituality and, I guess in some ways, a lifestyle. That would be Taoism with a touch of Buddhism. Taekwondo is a Korean martial art, and if you know anything about Korea, Korea is heavily influenced by Taoist philosophy. In particular, in my specific style of Taekwondo, third-degree black belts couldn't graduate to fourth-degree black belt until they were at least 18 years old. I want to say I got my third-degree black belt when I was 9 years old. I had it for over a decade, and the thing about the third degree form, as well as the philosophy and life lessons you're supposed to learn and accumulate throughout your time as a third degree black belt, are about balance. The main lesson is balance and how to integrate it into your life. So Taoism is the most important philosophy that would have shaped my life. And learning about it in American Lit, I did feel seen in the same way that Avatar made me feel seen, because not only was Avatar a show that had a lot of Eastern influence, it was also a show about martial arts. It was really cool seeing how they integrated the magic system that way. It also really inspired me to want to continue my own self-discipline. In 5th grade, my hobby that I shared with the class was meditation, and I don't think I got it from Avatar. It was something we did in summer camp at Taekwondo. I cannot emphasize enough how at peace I felt when we sat out in nature and just closed our eyes and became one with the world around us, basically, for who knows how long. That's why it became a childhood pastime for me, especially since I was used to having to sit around and wait for things. So I learned patience from a very early age, and I learned how to be okay with the silence, basically. So it was interesting to me to hear these philosophies that I was ingrained into from an early age, just from a very loose structure and without any sort of forceful religious book thumping on my head, to sort of see names for them, as well as learn about religions and philosophies that I didn't know. And it was a really good experience overall until I learned about Calvinism. And that is where the name insipid first started from, because when John Calvin's doctrine of predestination was described to me in American Lit, I feel like it was a very watered down and somewhat butchered explanation of what he was trying to say, and 15-year-old me had a bit of an ego and was kind of appalled by it and went, well, that is the most insipid view of God ever. Just to put myself back in the shoes of my teenage self at the time, what was going through my head is if predestination was true, and that meant that we had no true free will and that everything we did, we had no choice in the matter, then it felt like the sacrifice of Jesus didn't matter. And I didn't like that. I thought it was a very distasteful view of God, and that is the origin story for what would eventually become Destination Unknown's title. So when I was watching Destination Truth by Josh Gates, I was thinking, okay, but like, what can I work with the idea of predestination that would give the same sort of idea behind it, but not outright stealing the name? And then it hit me. The word unknown, because that at the time, and again, don't do stuff out of spite, I went, yes, our life is not known. We don't know where we're going to end up. It's not predetermined because we have free will. It will be called Destination Unknown. And once I officially made the change to that title, that was one of the final things I did as I finalized the script that would become episode 1. Prior to that, even my early outlines into half of 2017, it was still called Insipid. And what's so funny is Insipid, the actual story behind it, not only was it not meant to be an animation at first, it was a musical. It was supposed to be like a stage musical, because when I started developing Insipid, it was the year I was in pit band for the pajama game, and it's the only time I've been in pit band. And by the way, if you've never been involved in a pit before, it is some of the most complicated music you will ever play. And on top of that, we had to transpose in our minds different keys, because they only have these scores written in a specific key for every song, but sometimes the key doesn't really suit their voice, so they will raise it or lower it a few steps, and we had to transpose that in our minds. And sometimes it changed on us because the modified key they were working in, it still wasn't catering to their voice correctly, so we had to change it again during our practices. It was an experience. But that was when I wrote a lot of the early songs for characters who, a majority of them, no longer exist. I don't know if any of you are still around from when I mentioned that I forgot that my villain in the story, who was the leader of the thieves, who were called the Crypt. I'm not sure if you were around when I realized he no longer existed, but to explain with my lore driven concepts, he fell into entropy. What that means is he completely lost his identity in the creator, and the creator completely forgot about him. The problem is the plot still functioned as if he was still a character that existed, and I had to scramble to try to find what character would take his place. And what's so wild about this is I don't remember his name. He was such a big, important, pivotal character. And when I realized he wasn't going to work out how I needed him to work out, I forgot about him. And the only reason I know he exists is, one, Artixie had to kick off the plot somehow, because Artixie isn't the creator. Artixie is one of the creator's messengers, and she is specifically tasked with preventing the thieves from taking the fire element. But if the thief didn't exist, then there's no reason for Artixie to be an Archealo. And the other reason I knew he existed is he had a whole song dedicated to him called Sad Soul. It's one of the few songs I still remember mostly from memory. It is such a fun one to sing, and I may just record it again one day if I ever have the motivation to. But this is where a lot of my lore is developed from. It's not so much, I need to find something and this is what we're going to use to explain it. It's more my writing process is physically ingrained into the lore. And if something weird happens, like me forgetting the name and purpose and like everything about a character outside of what was specifically written for his song and what his influence on the plot was supposed to be, it's lore. And that's what I mean by my story is a story about storytelling. And I feel like a lot of people may not understand that that's what it is. But at the same time, that's just the hidden message of the story. I want to write people specifically. I like to look at contradictory personality traits or characters who may not, when you look at it on a surface level, mesh together very well, but I'd like to try to find a way to work them into the plot or their individual narratives to create some sort of wonderful work of art with them. For me, that is where the full enjoyment of my own story comes from. It's seeing my characters grow and develop in the weird things they come up with. Like, why did I have to completely remove the creation chamber away from the spirit realm? Why did the spirits think they were the creator when they're the creation? Like, there's some weird stuff that happens in my story, and I try to explain it to people, and they're like, well, you have full control of the narrative. I'm like, oh, yes, I do, but my characters do weird stuff, and I'm kind of just along for the ride. And the other thing is when it comes to the creator within the world of Destination Unknown, it's as if the entire situation I ended up in was a self-fulfilling prophecy. You see, it's not just Akita that's dismissive about the creator, it is the entire world. The creator is an entity that's been lost to time. The spirits in the spirit realm more see it as a personified enigma to describe a collective conscience, and they aren't realizing that they are the creation, and it causes them to intervene with narratives that they shouldn't be. The world is supposed to function in this way. The creator as a character is hardly relevant to the story, because the story itself is that all of these different stories all come together, and when you look at each and every individual, all the trials and tribulations they have to overcome, all their different belief systems and goals and ideologies, and all of their struggles, it all comes together to form one giant story, and that's sort of the hidden message of the narrative. But it was never supposed to be like an intentional in your face, oh my gosh, we're all the body of Christ. Like, it was not intentional. It was more of a joke, and then I ended up having to sort of have that existential crisis in my brain for years, and going, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't joke about matters like this, because I know this might be a really weird and uncomfortable thing to hear from me, because one of the things that I have been consistently told by people who I thought I was at least acquaintances with over the years, whenever I talk about my background or I'll mention something about God, or that I grew up in the Catholic Church, or that I still believe, everyone is shocked. And it's never been something I've tried to hide. In fact, I was very open about this back in 2017, but I also learned really quickly how ignorant I was to a lot of things due to being a sheltered Catholic kid, that I kind of just learned to, I don't know, I had to suppress myself, basically. It's difficult to describe, but think about how a lot of people over the years have been coming out as various identities because they've had their self suppressed by a lot of religious trauma, and so have I, guys, so have I. But I have felt repressed in the community itself because I've been having to respect a lot of other people's religious trauma, and the concept of God can be really triggering to people. The problem is, for me, God's always been a very important part of my life for a very, very long time. It's hard to picture a time where God wasn't a part of my life, and I don't mean that in a religious sense. I actually left the Catholic Church. I was called out of the Catholic Church from a Eucharistic miracle sometime between 2016 and 2018. And this is a weird story to explain, and I know a lot of people, even if you are spiritual in some way, what I'm about to talk about is just not going to sound possible. But I went up to receive the Eucharist one day, and it fell through my palms. Like, I'm not joking. The laws of physics actually broke. The Eucharist just went through my hands, and I was dazed. I pick it up and I eat it, because again, in the Catholic Church, the Eucharist is the literal flesh and blood of Jesus Christ. You aren't just going to let it fall on the ground. It's very important. So yes, I did eat the host from the ground. And I didn't end up drinking the wine that day because, I just ate something off the ground. I go back to my pew and I go to fold my hands to pray while kneeling. And I look at the palm of my hand. And I don't know how to describe this, but there was this loose, flaky stuff along the edges of my palm and then into the center. The best way to describe it is it almost, and I'm going to emphasize this, almost looked like a bunch of loose dry skin, but it also wasn't. And naturally, my first instinct is to lick it off my hand. When Sokka is in the cave in the desert episode and he licks the stuff off the wall because he thinks that the cactus juice is getting out of his system. Yeah, that's basically my mentality there. And then almost instantly, I went up. I am an idiot. I should have taken a picture of that. I could have sent in a sample to a lab because I don't know. If you have this happen, if you were in my position and you have this happen, to say that you would have done that, I'm not so sure. I felt like I was in a trance almost, and I didn't really snap out of it until I licked it off my hand and went, what the frick did I just lick off my hand? And it didn't really have a taste either. It was somewhat slightly sweet, but mostly tasteless, which was really weird, especially since, it's on your hand, so you would expect it to taste almost salty. And I just told my dad about it after church, and he went, oh, well, now you know that transubstantiation is real. But what he wasn't understanding is that was a literal sign from God to have me get out of the Catholic Church. Why I say that is the message for that was that the Eucharist isn't something that is supposed to be a weekly ritual. It's supposed to be something you're doing in your spirit every single day. And so I know I joke that Catholics are cannibals, but in the Christian belief system, you kind of are supposed to be literally eating the flesh of Jesus. You're supposed to be experiencing his memories on a daily basis, which is what that miracle was about. And I'd be taught about this in my spirit throughout the years since it happened. And I'm still learning about it. Every single time that I think I have this event in my life figured out, I learn something new about it. And it goes, oh, well, I never thought about it that way. However, because I still lived with my parents at the time, I still had to go to weekly mass. And in the Catholic Church, if you do not attend weekly mass, it is considered a sin. And it's taken so seriously. When I was going through the rite of initiation of acceptance into adulthood, the RCIA program, which I think recently has been rebranded into some other acronym, but we were told that there were portable containers that you could put the host into to give to someone at a hospital or who couldn't make mass for any reason that wouldn't be their fault, so they could consume Jesus that week. So the communion, I cannot emphasize it enough, is the most important part about Catholic Mass. And it's really weird to talk to people who are still in the church, or even Protestants who don't believe in the literal consumption of communion, where they think it's just entirely symbolic, to explain, yeah, this did happen to me, and I don't think my explanation of the events that occurred does it justice to what actually happened. And I know I sound like a crazy person when I talk about it. And what you have to understand is my first experience with religious trauma occurred either in first or second grade, when my dad was wanting to get back into the church because he had a student who ended up giving him a crucifix and then invited him to a Catholic Mass, and his childhood priest, who he hadn't seen in years and who was at a completely different church when he was a kid, said that mass, and then he heard the prodigal son passage. And the prodigal son parable is one that I have had problems with for many years. In fact, I don't think I fully understood the weight of the elder son's words until last year, because I always saw myself as the elder son in the prodigal son, so I didn't understand why he was condemned for, being mad that his brother is celebrated for basically being a dirty sinner and he never got anything. Although this was finally, after so many years, it was finally explained to me why that was so messed up for him. And you want to know who finally got it through to me why it was messed up? It was actually a lot of people in the community, believe it or not. A lot of you would make posts about student loan forgiveness, or, just not wanting people to suffer in the same way that you have suffered. Did the Holy Spirit finally tell me, do you see what they're saying? Do you see now that the elder son was in the wrong because he wasn't there because he loved his dad? He was there because he wanted to be rewarded. And he was blind to the true change of heart that his younger brother had by finally realizing that he was the one in the wrong. He couldn't celebrate with them because his heart was so darkened by pride. So circling this back to the Eucharistic miracle I received sometime when I was in my late teenage years, part of why it was so impactful for my own journey in faith is, one, it was a message that I could not ignore. I wouldn't say it's the one thing, but it's one of the physical things, something physically manifested that should not have been there. Because if you're not aware of what the host is supposed to look like for a Catholic church, it is a very hard and stale, solid piece of bread. It should not be flaky or have any way for it to look in the way that whatever appeared on my palm where it fell through. There's no logical explanation for how that ended up there. While the logical side could say that maybe I missaw and it bounced off of my palms and I perceived it as passing through my hand, I cannot deny that that manifestation of whatever was on my palm was in the exact place I saw the Eucharist fall through my hand. And I've had a lot of supernatural things that have happened to me over the course of my life, where a lot of things, they do have a logical explanation, and I will look at those every time. One such example some of my friends know about that happened since I moved into my new place is I have had a poltergeist. It's been my first experience with a poltergeist, but And if you don't know much about poltergeists, there are a few theories surrounding them. Of course, you have the typical theory in which people think it's some sort of spirit, but the other theory is that it is some sort of raw manifestation of uncontrolled psychic energy. For me, this poltergeist only acted up when I was in an active state of repentance. It was very, very weird. So, the story with my condo is something that I'll have to save for another video because it is a very long tangent to explain the miracles surrounding it. Plus, it ties into the summer job that I took to get the extra money that I needed for the down payment, which is also its own miracle in and of itself. And it deserves its own video. So just stay tuned. I'll probably come out with another speed paint explaining it, since I have wanted to talk about my experience at Cedar Point. Anyway, that was when the poltergeist started happening. At first, I was wondering if I'm losing my mind, because again, I've never had something quite this physical occur outside of the Eucharistic miracle. So I was attributing it to wind currents and just my imagination. But there were two things that happened that completely defy explanation. One was my toothbrush falling down and ending up against my mirror. And every time I have tried to replicate it, I don't know, one, how it could have bounced and ended up in that position. And two, there just wasn't enough force for it to even fall in the first place. It made no sense. My cats were nowhere around it. I heard it happen, and it wasn't just like a bounce bounce. What I heard was a da-dunk da-da-da-da-da-da-dunk. Like it was multiple things. It was almost as if like something was like trying to drag it around. Of course, I didn't see it, but I know where it was. I know what I heard, and I was able to replicate some of the sound. But again, it didn't have the force necessary to get it into that position. But that one was weird. And the other one, I saw out of the corner of my eye. I was at my computer desk drawing, and my speaker, it just slams down against the desk. And I'll show a picture of my speaker right here. You see how it is shaped like a trapezoid? It's also weighted on the bottom. I have tried replicating it multiple times over the years since it happened, and I don't know how it happened. And it didn't just like tip over like gravity. First of all, gravity can't even tip it over. My cats, despite, all their paws and stuff trying to mess with things, can't even tip it over. And this thing slammed down. It was like, I don't know, almost as if gravity itself like sucked a side of it down, because it slammed. And that was the moment of, I cannot deny that just happened, because I saw that happen. And yeah, and again, it was in a moment of me trying to talk to God. And that might sound strange to some people who are spiritual in some way, but for me, an ongoing conversation with God is kind of how I pray. And I don't mean just, having a conversation with yourself, because that is the thing I probably do the most, is I'm constantly in my head, constantly coming up with scenarios to either talk to people or to come up with events in my story. But then there's also I should talk to God about this, or something will happen in my life and I'll be like, I can't wait to tell God about this. And then the Holy Spirit will be like, hi, you can just talk to me, right? I went, oh yeah, I suppose that is a thing. And it's weird to describe what happens in my brain, but I don't really set aside a specific time to talk to God. It's more of I remember God is around, and then I'll talk to him, which is quite frequently, especially when you have a story like mine, in which creationism is a rather consistent aspect, even if it's more of like the underlying theme and not the main focus of the story. Because my lore is built around it, it makes me think think about God a lot, which therefore makes me talk to God a lot. And again, I know I sound schizophrenic. I'm used to it. I'm used to people thinking I'm insane. So, this is just again me being fully honest with you guys. This is a big part of who I am, and I'm not trying to be preachy in any way, but I can't share my story without sharing this aspect of myself because that would feel like I'm lying in some way. And this is going to sound hilarious, but the few people who have known about my deeply personal connection with God, two of them are atheists, and one was Catholic, but deconstructed from it and is on her own spiritual journey. So it goes without saying that, again, I've never hidden this part from myself, but I don't think I've ever talked about it in a video on my channel outside of live streams from 2017 because again I just want to respect everyone from all their different walks of life. I keep trying to bring up my own religious trauma and then I keep getting sidetracked. Thank you, ADHD. But the trauma I was going to talk about related to the Eucharist is when my dad was first getting back into the church. We were church hopping, and my mom is from a Baptist background. My dad was from a Catholic background. And if you know anything about Baptists and Catholics, they're kind of opposite on the theological spectrum of Christianity. So it was difficult trying to find a church that matched both of their needs in what they would want to see from a church. But there was this one Baptist church that they both enjoyed, and it had a youth program. And me being 6 or 7 at the time, I really didn't want to sit in the pews. You know, if you don't grow up going to church, it's all the more annoying when the routine starts to be integrated into your life. As a kid, you just don't understand why you have to sit around. And I liked the churches we went to that had programs like this for the kids. However, this would be the core of my religious trauma. One day, the youth leader rounded us up and she told us that we're going to be receiving the greatest gift we could ever receive in all of our life. We were going to be receiving Jesus. The only problem is there was a catch with this. So she had us circle around and repeat after her, Jesus, come into my heart. And there was like an emphasis on, that you'd feel Jesus come into your vessel, or that, like there'd be a knowing there. There'd be some sort of physical feeling that he is present with you. The problem is, despite other kids mentioning something, I didn't feel anything. And I don't think I said anything. I was a relatively quiet kid. But after she said this, she then emphasized that the consequence for not asking with all our heart fully to ask Jesus to come into our heart, that we were going to hell. And this terrified me. I was a very small child who couldn't understand if I did something wrong because I wasn't feeling anything, but I have a very difficult time even feeling emotions, partially due to the bullying that was going on in school, but also because I've kind of always been that way. And to trim God down to a feeling and, emphasizing hell, eternal damnation to a child. None of us could have been older than 10 in that room. You just don't do that. There is a specific verse in the Bible about woe to those who lead children astray because their angels meet directly with the face of God. And it's stuff like this. I would hold this fear in me even until adulthood, that I did something wrong in this moment. And to make it worse, when I was going through the RCIA program, I had to get involved in the youth group that they had for high schoolers at the time. And then it would make my trauma even more intense, because not only was I still having questions about if I did something wrong or if I didn't fully ask Jesus into my heart back when I was 6 or 7, and that I was some sort of sinner elect for damnation because of it. The Catholic youth group I was in played a video, and I'm going to paraphrase what it said, but covertly, through manipulative language, they were saying that if you have friends or family, and if they don't accept Jesus, their sin is your sin, and you're guilty of hell because you didn't convert them. This is actually probably the worst religious trauma that happened to me here, because it's just wrong to guilt someone, especially children, because again, I was a teenager when this one happened. And by some miracle, it didn't turn me away from God or the church at the time. I think back then I saw it more as just a video in youth group that I disagreed with, and I could separate it from my church. But it wouldn't be long after that I would be supernaturally called out of the church via that Eucharistic miracle. Which reminds me, I keep derailing and getting away from that point. The other reason the Eucharistic miracle was so impactful and important to me is this entire concept right here. The fact that I was never really sure if I had Jesus, if I was saved because of religious trauma. Even having that Eucharistic miracle occur, I'd still have that anxiety because again, there was never a feeling involved. Despite, all the stuff God has done for me in my life and all the knowledge that I have received from Him over the years, it was always this, but I don't fit in with other Christians, so am I really a Christian? So God will always take me back to that miracle and explain and build on it for me, because that is the anchor point for Him reassuring, this is who I am. Yes, I am Jesus. This is what that means. Please just listen to me. Don't listen to the church leaders. It was actually not long after that Eucharistic miracle occurred that the church would start doing this other reading that they only did for a year, and it creeped me out because it was so culty. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, but the Catholic Church is already kind of culty. But I mean, this was culty for the Catholic Church. Basically, it was a very short, like maybe 4 or 5 sentence reading that was an affirmation of faith and insistent that the Catholic Church was the only way. I disagreed with it because, one, I don't agree with the Catholic Church insisting that it is the only true church. And two, it felt wrong. I've rarely had a conviction in which I felt like that saying audible words would put me in a position of judgment, and somehow, despite being surrounded by everyone who was Catholic, it felt like speaking the words that were on that page might be held against me in some weird supernatural way. Luckily, at this time, my compromise with God was that since I couldn't get out of the Catholic Church because I still had to attend Mass because I still lived with my parents, I would sing in the choir, which meant that I was in a separate area with the rest of the choir, so it wouldn't be weird if I didn't say the affirmation of faith because I wasn't in a position in which there were other people around me saying it. Because yeah, for some reason, everyone in the choir, we said it once and then we all just decided not to learn it collectively. I don't know if they also had the same conviction or it was just laziness on our part because it was a completely different thing that was only temporarily there for a season. But I also had a whole section of this video that was going to be dedicated to my trauma with choir and singing, but I have since axed all of it because it involves people from a long time ago again that I just don't think it's right for me to air things out onto the internet just to say, oh, woe is me, this is what happened when I'm healing from it. There's no need to bring it up. Just know that my high school choir and the environment that surrounded it made me feel worthless and that I was a terrible singer. Unfortunately, I was convicted to delete large section right here because I ended up going into the choir trauma anyway, and the Holy Spirit said, "Where is that person who used to rejoice in the face of rejection? You don't know what those people who caused you to feel worthless, what they were going through. But you do know in the case of your choir director that something did happen in his family that should have never happened. And for you to talk about this might taint the perspective other people may have about some of the people who negatively impacted your life, in the same way that you get upset when you have vented about your situation in the past with your family living at home, where people would condemn your family or your coworkers because they made you personally had a bad day, when you know that those people who caused you harm were also hurting themselves. So, how I will talk about singing is just the solo that I got. I'll sing the solo that I got and I'll explain what God used the solo for in hindsight to teach me. Oh, the power to be strong and the wisdom to be wise. All these things will come to you in time. On the journey that you're making, there'll be answers that you seek. But it's you who climb the mountain. It's you who reach the peak. Very long story short is I have suffered from crippling stage fright that I can't feel due to my emotions being suppressed, basically. And that was the only solo I got while I was in high school choir. And it was also the tenor part, so I technically took it from a guy. They did auditions for it the day after I found out I didn't move up to the top choir for something that was honestly bullcrap. However, the song itself was used to not only show me that all of the rejection that I have received over the years has been used to further God's plan for his kingdom, it's also to show me that even though I mess up a lot and I'm always striving to understand things and learn more, despite the treacherous mountain that I will overcome in the end, no matter how long it takes. Ironically, that song's also titled Son of Man, too, which when I realized that when I was recording this video, I audibly laughed. I share these small glimpses into my past as a way to share my heart with everyone who has enjoyed my videos over the years. I know I'm a very small channel and I haven't been around in a while. And to the few of you who are still lurking and want to know what's going on, I feel like it's the right thing to do to take down the script for a moment and just be real. This is hardly even a fraction of some of the stuff that I've been through. And every time I think about my own struggles, tribulations, and trials, everyone else has had it so much worse than I have. And I don't say that in a way to diminish my own experiences, because these have all been learning experiences for me, as well as everyone involved in the lives that I have touched and the lives that have touched me. But I know one common theme that has been following me over the years is the friends that I was friends with, even though it was always for a very short season in my life. They constantly told me that I was a light for them in times of darkness. After reaching out to some people to, kind of just talk, it makes sense. I'm just that person that pops in to give a message and then I'm sent elsewhere. And I just have had to come to terms with that. It's something that I have always known to be a thing, just because it's been a consistent pattern. But going through my entire life, seeing all the rejection that I've received, both due to stuff beyond my control and heavy atmosphere of the stuff around me that kind of convinced me I was worthless, especially when it came to choir. And that's when God took me back to the Eucharistic miracle and pointed out how the point of the Eucharist is to not just remember Jesus' sacrifice, but to literally relive his memories and have a life that reflects his. Did I start to feel so much better about the stuff that has happened in my life. I know my tone throughout this video has been kind of melancholy. Part of that's for going completely off script and just allowing my thoughts and memories to flow in a way that I wouldn't allow myself if I were to completely script it out. I have had to delete so much of my audio because I start to bring something up and then I'm like, wait, no, that's not just my story to share. But it's good now because every single time I look at something and go, this was something that kind of sucked for me, I can remember that for the other people I was with when they were going through dark times, that in some ways it was so much worse for them, while also remembering that this was part of why Jesus carried his own cross. A lot of people, when they say carry your own cross, they only refer to carrying a sentence of your own death. How it was explained to me in the spirit, just like Jesus was carrying the sins of the world, I was carrying the hearts of other people with me. And the reason I have felt trapped in trying to even speak up or explain this is the mental war that's going on inside of me, I knew I couldn't, because they're not just my stories to share. I've sat with a ton of people hearing some things that I just can't air out because basically I was a witness to them, a witness to their trauma and their suffering, and a witness to oftentimes the trauma and suffering of other people who did some of these same people harm, and feeling trapped just like I was in elementary school, where I, for some reason, still was acquainted with the bullies and knew some of the stuff they were going through, but at the same time I couldn't sit with them because they wouldn't want to sit with my fellow outcasts. While my own heart wants to speak more in depth about my experience online with the Warriors voice acting and animation communities, that's not what Jesus has led me to do. In fact, his whole message is that if there's anyone who's done something in the past, it's forgiven. That is all he wants people to know. Anything that I was personally connected to or I knew about, that it's forgiven, just like the bullies who made all of my friends and acquaintances in elementary school their lives a living hell. That too is forgiven. Everything is. And that is the only way I can even discuss my experience and the patterns that repeated ever since I came online and I have felt suffocated in this space. He's very strict that I can't talk about it because that would be digging up the past. And I do not know if people's hearts have changed since I talked to, in some cases, some of these people 7 years ago. There's some people who they shared stuff that was going on with me back in 2017, and I haven't spoken to them since. So even though there are things that are impactful to me that happened from those events, I can't share them because they're not my stories to share. And if this sounds weird to you, I'd look at it from this perspective that I have been a person that is an open book for people, and everyone is welcome to talk to me. It doesn't matter your background. I am here to listen. I'm here to give advice if you want advice. And I'd say that is the biggest lesson I've had to learn, is some people just need a shoulder to lean on. They don't want someone to talk back with solutions and rationality. And that has been a humbling experience for myself, because I know I mess up with my words sometimes, trying to help people out of situations they're in when all they need is to let it out and move on. In fact, I kind of find it wild because here I am holding things in for over 2 decades, and I'm still remembering some things that happened in first grade and having to tell myself, not everyone is this way. A lot of people, they just need to vent out their frustrations and they can move on as if it's been forgotten. Unfortunately for me, I'm the person who remembers things. And when people come to me with a frustration or they vent something out, I don't forget about it usually. So I'm left here in some cases. It's been well over a decade since I've spoken to some people IRL. I don't know if those things that were troubling them at the time have changed. In some ways, you have, like, they're troubled over something someone else did to them, or they're troubled about their own actions and are worried about stuff that's going on. In both cases, I can't say either thing, whether they're being the victim or the bully. All that matters in the end is that I was there to witness what was going on and for them to have a channel to vent their frustrations out to. The whole lesson for me is to learn that I need to accept that that is where it ends, that I'm supposed to immediately give that to Jesus and move on myself, because that's what I have not been doing. It's not like consciously holding on to things. It's someone will say something, then another person will talk to me, and then I'll notice the pattern and remember, oh, well, this is the same thing but from the other party or a different party that was involved in this same situation. And, it builds over time, and I thought I was forgetting, but that's not what God was saying. God was saying I was holding on to it, not out of animosity, but because I'm just concerned for everyone. That's the full truth. It's a sense of concern. Like, I'll open up about one thing that did occur that is entirely on me and my fault. So a lot of you know that I do identify as non-binary, and it took me a long time to even come to terms with that aspect of myself, because growing up Catholic and stuff, not only am I going to be skeptical, something I didn't agree with and I still don't agree with, and you guys are welcome to call me out on what I'm about to say. To not have gender dysphoria and to change your pronouns, I find that to be dangerous. I'm someone who has had this my entire life. Again, not to the same extent that other people around me have. In fact, I have seen people go through full-on schizophrenic episodes trying to deny this aspect of themselves. And sadly, a lot of them ended up being taken to conversion therapy camps, and we're just not going to get into what they went through. But it took me a long time to understand why someone would want to change their pronouns if they don't experience gender dysphoria. Because to me, I wouldn't wish having this sort of aspect of myself, this extent of suffering on someone else. I see the pattern time and time again. People who say they don't have gender dysphoria, once they change their pronouns, they start experiencing social dysphoria. So I did talk to a number of people in private, and of course every person left me on red when I'd give them a warning about it. And this is something I feel like I should apologize for, because how I look at it now, it just wasn't my place to say something like that. But I want you to know it came from a place of genuine concern for others. I went up to my mom and dad when I want to say 5 or 6, and I told them that I was a boy and I didn't want to be a girl anymore. And that was how I ended up learning the term tomboy. And then sometime around the same era of my life, I ended up learning about intersex conditions. And that's another thing that has been bothering me lately with the LGBT community. But ironically, once again, God was telling me that I need to not have this sort of judgment. He was the one who weirdly corrected me on this, but I saw a lot of people as taking intersex identities, despite not being born as intersex, as kind of offensive and dismissive to people who go through the struggle. And I was seeing people who were changing their pronouns and taking a trans label despite openly saying multiple times that they don't experience gender dysphoria, as dismissive to the people who experience it on a daily basis. But what God explained is that I was hardening my heart to these real experiences people were going through. Sometimes some people have to walk through the shoes of other people to fully understand them. And I can't really emphasize this enough. You don't actually know the struggles an intersex person goes through unless you are intersex. And because it's not some sort of romanticized condition like some people think it is. It is a massive spectrum. It's hardly understood. Even the conditions that most people are aware of, there's spectrums within those conditions, and they don't just affect your genitals, they affect your entire body. And in some cases, some of them don't even have long life expectancies because their condition affects certain vital organs. But where God had to correct me on this is I'm casting judgment without knowing a person's DNA. And when you're being corrected by the creator of the universe, you have to listen. And I'm putting this out here to be fully open and upfront about something I did mess up on in my past. And part of it was out of projection. The other part was, again, genuine concern. I don't want people to not have gender dysphoria their whole life and then they are suddenly subjected to it because they realize people don't respect your pronoun or they don't actually see you as the gender you perceive yourself. When it comes to my own journey with gender, I actively decided against medical intervention. Now, I was happy because at my work, the insurance does cover gender transition surgeries and the medication surrounding it. So I am happy that if I ended up getting to that point one day where I could no longer take it anymore, the option did exist. But the reason I decided against it was two things. One, my body is a temple for the Holy Spirit, and I felt like the Holy Spirit wanted me to sing. And if I were to take testosterone, there is a chance that I would lose my singing voice. It's not talked about, but some people, testosterone can cause vocal damage. And I didn't want to go through that personally, despite the fact that I am kind of uncomfortable with my voice. And it's only been recently that I've been trying to reclaim it and embrace it. But what he was trying to get me to understand is I'm not willing to go down that path to fully understand the experiences, to fully gain the knowledge and walk in the shoes of what people are going through right now. So therefore, I have no room to really talk on it. And I know this is going to be something that any Christian watching might be a bit appalled by, because to them, they'd see it as very black and white and in the flesh, and to them, I'll give you the same explanation that God gave to me. God birthed the universe. Have you ever wondered why people are very obsessed with the idea of male pregnancy, why that is a very hot button topic at the moment when it comes to define a woman, define a man? One, the entire fetish is a mockery of God, and God won't be mocked. Two, because at the end of the day, God is the one who birthed the universe through Jesus. It's through his womb, just like how Eve was basically birthed out of Adam in some ways. Who are you to say what is impossible and what God won't do? When you see common sayings and mantra that gets echoed on repeat, there's a chance that it could be a spiritual snare. I will use one example that I heard growing up that is unknowingly blasphemy, and I will explain it to you. The phrase, "life is not fair," is blasphemy to Jesus. Who is the life-giving spirit? If you say this, and I know a lot of conservatives often say that, especially when they try to explain their specific views on the LGBT community and why they think a specific way. Sometimes they will throw that in there when they try to talk about sin, but Satan is not the life-giving spirit. So when you are saying that phrase, you are literally saying that Jesus is not fair. Another common thing I heard growing up is that God wouldn't give you more than you can handle. And this is something that I did repeat until Jesus corrected me on it. And ironically, it is Lo Zacharon's whole plot when I think about it. But the whole point is that he will give you situations you can't handle, so you know to lean on him. It's very common sayings like that lead people astray. And to get so weird about the semantics of things, or to say that man can't get pregnant, is actually offensive to God. It blew my mind when he explained it to me like that, because I was falling down for a time. I was falling down the beginnings of the alt-right pipeline. That's part of where Habari is a bit of a comfort character for me, because I can explain some of the twisted navigations of having to deal with that entire thing. Not because I was naturally predispositioned for alt-right thinking. I had a rather diverse group of acquaintances in high school, so I was predisposed to lots of different thinking, which meant that I was seeing a lot of alt-right channels more for what their genuine thoughts were on things and not thinking too much about them and feeling like a lot of them were misunderstood or mislabeled. And in some aspects, I do feel like people were screaming Nazi to people who were not actual Nazis at the time. But because they got pushed to a point, they eventually went, oh, so you think I'm a Nazi? Well, I guess I'll just become one. And that was when it got very weird and things flipped all of a sudden in the alt-right pipeline. Like, it was people who were, I want to say, genuinely libertarian or just anti-establishment in general got sucked down into this sort of rabbit hole without realizing the dangers that were there. Now, a lot of people did recognize the dangers, but they were pointing out the wrong aspects, which in turn caused people to go further down the rabbit hole. Basically, what it does is it, on the surface, shows some things as objective facts that you go, well, I guess that is a fact, so I guess they are being logical, and it just twists it further and further and further until you're trapped and there's no way to escape. The big one that I think gets a lot of white men in particular is the concept of white genocide. On the surface level, saying that white people only make up 7% of the world population, it does come across as, well, that is objectively true, so I guess they do have a point in the matter that, yeah, as you can see, I'm even stopping myself to even explain it. Basically, they're concerned for the extinction of their quote-unquote race, and it preys on the insecurities of a lot of white men who, for a time, they felt like they just were being the butt of every single joke. I know it somewhat happened to my brother, though I'd say he's even more liberal than I am now, but when he was in high school, he felt like people were ignoring him and, blaming him for things his ancestors did. And his response to that was, my ancestors were indentured servants. We are Irish. But it just goes to show how intertwined and convoluted history is, that you have to explain that Irish people weren't even considered white until sometime in the 20th century. We were one of the people who were excluded from things. There was I'm just not even going to say what the signs were. But it's just so funny talking about things because people have a very parochial lens they view things under. And the issue with the alt-right pipeline is it uses something like the concept that is white genocide. It presents it on the surface level with facts you can't ignore, and you recognize them as facts, and then they pull you into an ideology so slowly you don't even realize it's happening. There is another thing that they are very obsessed with called ideological subversion. And to them, I say the reason you're so obsessed with it is because you've been ideologically subverted. But the reason ideological subversion is such a scary concept to consider, think about AI right now. Artificial intelligence, it has existed in the private sector for way longer than it's existed in the public. How long have they been using this technology on us and we haven't known? They could have been ideologically subverting us through AI for maybe even 20 years or longer at this point. And we have no idea that we have been manipulated by algorithms and artificial intelligence systems. It's a scary concept to consider, but the alt-right is very focused on the quote-unquote woke left, that they think that the left has been ideologically subverted. I'm not going to comment on it. I'm more of the opinion of horseshoe theory, where the extremes on both ends always end up at anti-Semitism for some reason, just like every single conspiracy theory. But there's no doubt in my mind that the alt-right neo-Nazi sect of things is the biggest threat to culture at the moment, and if nothing is done about it, it will destroy us. And I don't say this lightly. I say this as someone who was there back in 2017 when Jason Alsop still had his channel and other content creators like him. And he was one of the people who was over at Charlottesville, and he had a whole video about how it was a giant misunderstanding. And there's a reason he no longer has a YouTube channel. But a lot of these platforms that have popped up over the years as alternatives to YouTube come from the alt-right pipeline, if you know their origin stories. But the alt-right pipeline is an area where I have a lot of knowledge that I kind of don't want to repeat on the matter, because I was there as the what eventually became the modern day what we are seeing. I was there as it was developing, and I had to eventually just cut myself off from even looking at those channels as a research hobby for myself, because it was starting to negatively impact me, and I was starting to agree with their logic in a way that I shouldn't have. So I say this in relation to where I went wrong with trans issues. Is medical transition is not a path I'm personally going down myself. It's not knowledge that I am led to learn. I am happy where I currently am. And where I currently am is I just kind of don't care. I am a child of God. That's all that matters to me. I need to look nowhere else to really fill the void that's there. I don't have to change my appearance. I don't have to change myself. All that matters is that spiritually I am aligned to the Most High. Where I went wrong is, even though it's a pattern I observed and it's something that has concerned me, I'm not personally the one experiencing distress by it. There was one point he actually called me worse than the Pharisees for some of the things that I have said, because he'd tell me things and I'd know that there are some things that people look too closely into the law and they'll dismiss actual things God has set up and moved people into positions for. And I'll know the knowledge and the reasons for them, and yet still I will get really into the law because I can be very petty with some of the revelations he gives me. And he'll call me out on it, and this was something he had to call me out on. The people who wanted to change their pronouns or experiment with their gender, who didn't have dysphoria, what they needed was someone who'd be willing to talk to them without judgment. And even though my intentions were supposed to be good, there is a saying that hate is only what you say, not what you mean. What I meant was to offer a judgment-free zone and to talk about my own experience with gender dysphoria and why I would personally have concerns about someone who doesn't experience it possibly develop it due to an incongruity in their social and internal perceptions. But that was not the way to go about the conversation. I didn't realize that I was casting judgment with my words, and I am truly sorry for the people that I did talk to in that manner, because you would have seen me later having identified as non-binary and you would have seen it as hypocritical. Because, yes, in a way, it was hypocritical on my part. Actually, I'll do one more story until I get into the formal update on Destination Unknown and Expedition Uncharted. If you have stuck around through this entire video so far, thank you so much, and I hope that my honest, raw thoughts haven't completely scared you away. But if they do, I completely understand, because I know the community likes to cater their spaces to people that they know are safe individuals. Some of the stuff that you are hearing probably has you on edge, and I do understand that. To those who have gotten to know me on a bit of a deeper level over the years, they know where I'm coming from, and at the end of the day, I'm someone who can be honest to a fault. I like to over-explain myself because I feel like if I don't explain everything to the best of my knowledge, then I'm leaving something out, and I don't want to do that. And so I'm telling you from my own perspective that if my spiritual beliefs or my background in some of the stuff that I have been involved in gaining knowledge with, like the alt-right pipeline, or if you're a Christian and you don't necessarily agree with some of the things that I have said about God's character, I understand why that would make you uncomfortable. There's a reason I don't fit in with the churches. But just know that I wish you the best, and this will be the last story before I stop delaying. It's related to the other topic, but my experience at work when it came to socially transitioning, I feel horrible for all of my trans coworkers who have come into the store after me or transitioned after me. For some reason, everyone at my store is very adamant to respect me, but they don't seem to realize that there are so many other people who have come through that are even going through the process of medical transition, that they don't respect them at all, and I feel horrible for them. Here I am. I tell people I don't care if they get my pronouns wrong. At this point, I just use any pronouns. There was a point where I just wanted people to use they, them, or he, him. Now I just don't care. The problem is, everyone felt bad about this because they thought it was their fault for not, quote-unquote, trying harder. When in my case, it's always been more of an internal thing. But then these same people, they don't respect my other coworkers who are trans. And it's like, for some reason, they see me as someone who they think is quote-unquote authentically transgender, when in my own perspective, it's the opposite. I don't say this in a way to erase my queer experience when it comes to gender and sexuality. I say this to say that it bothers me when this aspect in others is completely denied, because for some reason, I guess because I'm easy to get along with IRL, that they see me as the model of what they expect from a trans person without realizing that my own emotional disposition is a bit impaired. I actually forgot to mention it earlier in the section with God, but God actually shoulders a lot of my emotions. This was something that I ended up taking to him one day, and he said that if I felt the full extent of some of the emotions, I just wouldn't survive. And I don't want to air out the problems of a lot of the friends I've had over the years, but a lot of them did struggle in the mental health department, if you know what I mean. Seeing how deeply they feel emotions And knowing that if I was fully in touch into my emotions, where that would probably lead me, I do fully believe that that is the case. But a lot of people do not have God in their life in this way to shoulder their problems, and what they are going through is extremely distressing. And the reason they are a bit argumentative or combative, or they just feel worthless because other people aren't perceiving them how they're trying so hard to be perceived, is they simply feel ignored or unappreciated. I don't need those affirmations. Please give them to the people who just want to be loved and they don't feel loved. I know some of my coworkers have religious convictions about respecting pronouns and stuff. Those aren't the coworkers I'm talking about, though, because those coworkers don't respect my own pronouns, and I get that. But to the ones who are genuinely trying, it just breaks my heart that they don't see it. And when I bring it up to them, it just doesn't consciously process to them, because to these coworkers, they see me as someone they care about, but they don't seem to care about the people they're not attached to. And I personally find that wrong. I get really attached to my new coworkers and I get sad when they leave. There was actually this one coworker I was really upset about that she was unfortunately let go, but she was a little baby witch and she had just recently gotten into some of that stuff and she didn't really have anyone to talk to. And of course, I know a lot about the occult and witchcraft and Wicca in particular. So obviously, I was someone who knew the stuff she was talking about and I could provide a channel for her to talk to. But since I do follow Jesus, I couldn't be a mentor to her how she was looking for. But she was interesting. And at one point, we were talking about cryptids and she brought up mermaids. And I mentioned how I didn't actually believe in mermaids. And she was actually very heartbroken about that, because to me, I've seen a lot of different shows that try to prove mermaids and they've all been proven to be hoaxes, that I just went, well, I guess mermaids aren't real. But she had this theory about how mermaids in the Pacific and the Atlantic have different personalities because they come from like different lines from, I don't know, the dawn of creation or something. And unfortunately, she was let go before I discovered that sirens are in the Book of Enoch. And I looked through that and went, wait, what are you telling me? That mermaids actually are biblical according to the Septuagint. I was blown away, and I really wish I could have, given her my own discoveries on the matter, because I can't believe I'd ever do that. And unfortunately, she was let go, and in my opinion, it was discriminatory what they did to her, because they let her go for something that another coworker was like given a slap on the wrist for. And I haven't seen her since, and I really wish I could, but I just hope that, giving her the channel to talk to at that point in her life, even though I only knew her for like a month or two, I just hope she's doing well, whatever she might be doing now. But every time the coworkers I resonate with, they always just leave because the other people around me just do not see them for the awesome people that they are. And it makes me so sad every time, because the stuff that they respect me for, they just don't respect these other people for. And it boggles my mind. Without further ado, the reason any of you probably clicked on this video, an update regarding Destination Unknown and the future of it and my channel. It's going to be a bit weird talking about this without a script, but you know what? I said screw the entire script, so just like the rest of the video, I guess we're doing that in this section as well. Destination Unknown Episode 2 will be coming out. It's just going to be a bit. I got rid of my Adobe subscription last year because I just haven't had the time to draw like at all thanks to my full-time job. But earlier this year, I finally was able to get off the dreaded 1 to 10 shift, which was causing so many problems. I've always been an early riser, but ever since I started working in 2016, for some reason they always put me on the closing shift, so I've never been able to work mornings, aside from when I worked at Cedar Point briefly in 2021. And because I'm someone who naturally gets up at 5 a.m. every morning, it was causing me to be so out of balance, and I couldn't function, basically. Like, I think the best way to describe it is I was constantly tired, and due to my own inferiority complex and issues with self-worth and the perfectionism issues I did mention about earlier in the video, it just all kind of came together to put me in a really bad state after I released Destination Unknown and the years following that. But I am doing a lot better now, which means I am willing to jump back into Destination Unknown. If you weren't around earlier in the video, I mentioned that on February 28th, 2020, I stopped working on the episode altogether. This was about a week before we officially went into lockdown, but due to situations happening in my life IRL, I was in a very bad spot. I don't think I mentioned it in the earlier sections. I can't believe I didn't. But what happened is, around when I released Destination Unknown, the school I was going to transfer to axed my major, and my credits at my community college were catered to transfer there. So I didn't know what to do at that point, and due to Destination Unknown not really getting the response I had expected, I was basically running on an empty battery until February, when everything just crashed for some reason with my mental health. And then in lockdown, I was subjected to having my entire family home all the time, where it used to just be me alone most of the time because my work schedule was at night while everyone else worked in the morning, so I didn't have to worry about that extra baggage. But just like I said in an earlier section in the video, that I just gave all of the trials and tribulations in my life over to my God to deal with, because it was just too much. There is a certain extent in which you have so much knowledge and you are carrying the weight of so many people's problems that you basically become a liability, not only to yourself but everyone else around you. And that is what happened IRL within my own family, and that's why I had to get out and why it wasn't a safe place for me to be. With that said, please do not try to overthink or overanalyze what I just said, because my family are good people. They love me. They were just navigating a very difficult situation, and the pandemic was an unprecedented situation for a lot of people. But my dad lost his business. My mom pretty much had to foot all of the bills. My brother had relationship problems. And then stuff within my extended family happened. My grandpa died. A coworker who I pretty much called work dad, he unfortunately passed away, which then took away the one person in my life who had a relationship with God in the same way that I did, and that actually broke me. And then I felt like I couldn't talk to anyone online about the full extent of what I was going through, and every time I would bring up a frustration about my family situation and how living at home was actually driving me into the grave, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but everyone's first instinct was to condemn my parents or my brother or my coworkers or a bunch of other people in my life, when they too were people struggling with their own problems. And I was there, seeing it all, the person everyone was talking to, and having to shoulder everything that everyone else was going through, having to hear all the drama, hear all the complaints about other people, having to sit with people as they're all on the verge of panic attacks and also themselves wanting to just end it all. It was all subjected onto me. And again, please do not think about this in any dark way. I was not living in a situation that was intentionally abusive. People are human. Please accept their humanity. But that is the extent of what occurred in my real life. It does not get into anything that happened online, because I always am that person that is willing to talk to people, and everyone is welcome to talk to me. But now, as a more mature individual, I do realize that I need to put some checks and balances in place so I do not end up in these situations again where I pretty much become the center of the web and I am silenced, basically. And I don't mean this in the way of being silent out of fear. It is because people share their burdens with me. I help them through it, but then I cannot discuss those same burdens with people who may then misunderstand what someone is going through and may not understand why I am choosing to look at a situation under a specific lens. You are welcome to talk to me and call me out on things that I am ignorant to or I have a misunderstanding over, but please understand that every person's individual story and experience comes from a place often rooted in their own trauma that they are healing from, and their own actions are often driven from trauma responses. And when it came to my home life, it was pretty much all of us having to learn to rediscover the negative aspects of each other. But my relationship with my family is good, and I don't want anyone to take what I am saying here out of context and assume the worst from it. There are some things that do come into conflict, but those matters are between my family and I, and not my business to air out on the internet. Part of the issue in the larger world right now is we are all divided against each other without looking at the stuff that we share in common. I know it is really hard right now, especially with how the world is, especially in the Western world. I know it's bad out there, but please, we need to have a bit more love for each other. If we come together, and I say this as the community itself. Has anyone else felt like the animation community is just dead? I want to see it back. I think we should take our lampstands and we should revive the animation community. It's part of why I want to come back. I miss the animation community, but there's no community if we're not talking to each other. I know back in the early days, it was more of an illusion of community, but we also had consistent multi-animator projects and animators being in the same projects that it still kept us together. We were all commenting on each other's videos, encouraging each other to improve, and now we're all just in our own social silos, isolated, not really wanting to branch out. We need to be better than this, and maybe you guys won't join me in the new effort that I and a few others in the community want to start back up again. But I miss the community. I want to have a zeal for animation again. And even if it's just a few of you, I'd like to find my people. I just laid out an entire 3-hour plus video about this is who I am. This is what you're going to get. You may not like some of the aspects about me, but I also feel like we could use a bit more honesty and be open about ourselves. A lot of us feel like we're hiding in the closet, whatever it may be, and we need to come out of it. We need to be there for each other. So I'm not just bringing Destination Unknown back for myself. It's probably too idealistic on my part, but honest to my heart, what I want is to see the community again. I miss you guys. I know I've talked to a bunch of other animators and artists in private, even some voice actors. They miss all the indie projects and how they used to be. Is there a current movement in indie animation? Yes, but it's not the same thing as the community we once had here, and I want to see what we had at one point. I want that back. I want to see my sparkle animals and their crude animation styles. Maybe not even all that fluid. I just want to see people with their authentic stories. I want to see what is in your guys' heart of creativity. Life is a work of art. Why aren't we creating as we should? AI is threatening all of us. If we just continue staying like this, then we're just going to be defeated. Again, this is me just on my soapbox and going off the rails at this point. But honestly, this is what I want. I want to talk to people again. I want to talk about the fun stuff because I haven't had that in my life since basically 2017. Whatever happened to multi-animator projects where it was first come, first serve? Why did we all become so obsessed with the quality of our videos and completely ignored the kids who just wanted to express their creativity but didn't have the opportunity to even have their stuff shown on a channel they looked up to? That once existed for the rest of us. It doesn't now. I know part of it's because a majority of us have grown up and we don't have time in our lives anymore, but I also know from talking to so many of you over the years that many of you yearn for those old days, but none of us are willing to bring back the joy that we once had in those spaces. And I want to see that again. Maybe I'm too idealistic, but this is the optimism I'm going to have moving forward. After I get Diving Bell done, I want to open up a multi-animator project that would be first come, first serve. That'd be open to everyone. And I just want us to have fun. I don't freaking care if it's a PMV or you're a new artist who has to use MS Paint. I just want to see the heart of creativity again, because I feel like we haven't had it in a while. I feel like we've all been trapped in our own perfectionisms, trying to improve and improve. And I'm telling you from my own experience, in these years of isolation I've been in, it just damages you. We improve more when we work together as a community. Anyway, I went way off the rails from Destination Unknown and the update surrounding it. So to rephrase, I will be working on episode 2 again. I just need to resubscribe to Adobe, and I'm hoping to use their Black Friday deal once again, but we'll see if it exists this year. But I have some files that are still trapped on my Adobe account because I never exported them, whether they still be in Adobe Animate or they're in After Effects. And I haven't found a way to unzip those files from the specific software they're saved to. So I'm just gonna have to bite the bullet and resubscribe when I am fully committed to marathoning the rest of episode 2. Episode 2 is also going to be condensed from the script that the voice actors recorded years ago. A lot of it's kind of unnecessary banter, kind of like how Akita's banter in episode 1 with Settling and her mother was a bit excessive. I cut a lot of that down, and then I'm also changing the mall scene, which the voice actors would know about, to a montage. But it will be done. I am committed to getting it done. I need to for lore reasons, because episode 2 was the gateway to a joke that is no longer a joke, which is something called the Watchers. And what the Watchers are, I suggest you solve the ciphers in my webtoon. I reference it in multiple places. Granted, some of the ciphers are just random character facts or an explanation of a concept that may not have been directly in the episode, but it adds lore to it, basically. But the Watchers, please, you have to solve the ciphers. Please, please, please solve the ciphers. I have 2 people who keep commenting on my webtoon, and that is their only comment every time. What is the cipher? And I tell them how to solve it every time, and I don't think they read my reply. So for the sake of my fans who may not have the brain power to be able to go in and solve the ciphers, they would like the ciphers solved. And the ciphers are important because if you don't know about the Watchers, you are going to be in interesting situation going into season 2 and onward into my comic, which I just totally just started talking about my comic before I fully announced it. So I have a webtoon called Expedition Uncharted. It takes place about 3 decades after Destination Unknown, and if you're worried about it giving you spoilers to Destination Unknown, what I will say to that is a majority of my story's lore is quote unquote beyond the firmament. What I mean by that is most of my story's lore is about the creator and the spirit realm and how the processes of everything work. But the story itself is about the characters and how they interact with the world and the trials and tribulations they overcome. So you don't know Akita's story, you don't know Mars' story, you don't know Xtadaline's story, you don't know Cynthia's story, you don't know any of my characters' stories from Destination Unknown, because a lot of them are tight-knit and only on the other side of the rift, which is when they are on Earth. That story is mostly enclosed, so while it will spoil the finale outcome for Destination Unknown, which is actually a video I did do on my channel, which is Doomsday. That was the finale. It gets explained what exactly that was in season 2 of Expedition Uncharted. But the stuff I don't want to spoil about Destination Unknown, that won't be mentioned, because I still have stories I want to tell within Destination Unknown itself. It's just going to be on the back burner after I finish episode 2, and will probably come back as like short stories of the characters' daily lives or something, unless I somehow get a budget for it, which I doubt. But anyway, I keep derailing. Back to my webtoon. My webtoon is about Comaris, and Comaris were the villains in Destination Unknown. They are on an expedition to uncharted waters in the east. Their first destination is Mist Reef Island, which, fun fact, the filler name I had for this in my outline was Mystery Island, and then I just made it a pun on words and decided to keep it because mist is a common theme that surrounds one of the types of Watchers in my story, so that's why it is the beginning of the Watcher arc. But I am really excited for the Mist Reef arc. It is season 2. It will probably be about 50 to 60 chapters. And like Destination Unknown, it is mostly an enclosed story. A lot of the characters we meet on Mist Reef, we probably are not going to see again. But they give important lessons during a season in the story that the characters will then take with them and will remember throughout the rest of their journey. The messaging on Mist Reef is very bittersweet, and the people who are aware of the content within this arc, they're kind of mad at me because of the bittersweet messaging in it, but I will say that is the type of story that I tend to write. It's generally not going to be fully lighthearted or full of angst. It's going to be something that brings you both pain and joy at the same time. And Mist Reef is the specific arc in the story that wants to capture that more than anything. Like, oh boy. So, if you watch the earlier part of my video, you'd hear about me rant about how I don't really know how to write romance. A small spoiler for one of the plot lines that is in the Mist Reef arc, I have to write a date. I've never had to write that before. When I have characters who get into a romantic relationship in my story, it's either played off as a joke that happens off screen, or it's just implied, or they're an already established couple, or the characters, like in Runa and Noka's case, they're just always in the pining phase and they like each other but they never say anything. And then in the arc in between, they get together and I never had to worry about it. Or like a majority of the canon couples in my story, one of them is Arrow Ace, and it's just not romantic at all. I don't know what it is. I guess this is just what happens when you are on the aromantic and ace spectrum yourself, that you just kind of are like, Yeah, they're like contractually obligated to each other because, as I mentioned in an earlier section of my video, that's kind of just how I viewed relationships for a while. This is me actually trying to look into a character's needs very in depth and saying, yeah, I'm going to attempt to do this. Will I succeed? I have editors for a reason. They know romance better than I do, so they'll definitely help me out with it. And I see Howie and Winter looking through my screen right now, and they're just, shaking their fist because they know what this plot point is. And to them, I say, let my characters be free. Let my characters be themselves. If they are not tied down to one person, I'm going to use them how I want to use them. I have very specific messages that some of my characters need to provide, especially on Mystery, because they are the worshippers of the Guardian of Life. They have specific lessons the characters need to know before they head east. Especially characters like Sabel and Zamar, who are the sibling characters in this arc. A reoccurring theme in my story for some reason is it always goes down to siblings in the diverging paths they go under. In Destination Unknown, it is Thetaline and Akita. In Renegade Underground, it is Runa and Lozacharon. In Expedition Uncharted, it is Lozacharon and Mizra. And for some reason, I did the same thing in East Point with Gullion and Akun, and then in Mystery, it's Sabel and Zamar, who literally go in two different directions. And then from there, I know another sibling characters who I'm not going to mention yet, who pop in through every single part of the story. I don't know what it is, it's just that's the thing I'm always led to talk about in my stories, just sibling characters, how they are, where they're going, and where they end up. I know I keep derailing, but I want to talk about Sabel real quick. I have some very fun facts about this character. He was supposed to be in Destination Unknown. He was going to be one of the friends on Earth, and then I moved him into Renegade Underground, and he was going to be one of Runa's love interests. And then that plot point also got given to Jasper, and then it got given to Noka. And then from there, I moved Sabel to East Point, and he was supposed to be the one in Gullion's role. But then Gullion happened, and then I moved him to Mystery, where he will finally have his time to shine after almost a decade of getting his role moved around over and over and over again. Justice for Sabel, he finally gets to shine. And then Zamar exists, threatening to take a lot of the spotlight off of Sabel once again. Oh man. The poor boy just can't catch a break. I don't know what it is with Sabel's character specifically and why he hasn't been able to have his role fulfilled. I actually had to look up what his name was because I'm like, is your name cursed or something? Because that is something I have noticed. When I name characters, I put sounds together. If they end up being actual words or actual names, I find that out in hindsight. Sabel's name means God is my oath, or alternatively sand. And in both cases, it's very funny because with sand, I think I built my house on sand, hoping it would stand. Like, it just kind of fits his, the idea that every time I think I have a specific position for Sabel, his castle just metaphorically gets destroyed. And then the other meaning, God is my oath, kind of makes it seem like the creator just didn't want to incarnate him. Well, too bad, Sabel. You will exist now. You get to join Artixi and the rest of the Guardians with being incarnated and the wonderful wonders that is being subjected to duality. But while I have you guys here and I'm gushing about my story in depth, I'll explain the background lore on Expedition Uncharted, because just like Destination Unknown, I kind of just decided we're going to go into this without any knowledge, with no prologue. And without the prologue, if you're not paying attention to the details as they come up, you might be a bit confused. So, to start out with, The finale for Destination Unknown results in the eternal light being redistributed into the stardust. How this is explained in the spirit realm in metaphorical terms is it's the creator's spirit being spilled out onto future incarnated souls. How I will explain it in the most simple terms possible. I have 7 different paint buckets. I spill 4 of them out immediately after the Destination Unknown finale. Then we spill the cyan bucket out onto it about 5 years after Destination Unknown's finale. And then at the end of Renegade Underground, we spill the final 2 buckets. And the full spirit of the creator is now on Volin. The only problem is, just as everything in my story works with a duality, there are 2 aspects of the creator's spirit that are on Volin. One part of it that is spilled out is about to be explained by Alaja very soon in Expedition Uncharted. Like, in the next few chapters, she will explain what I am talking about. And it's because of that, I don't want to mention it here in the video. It's just so close to having it explained in the story itself that it kind of be anticlimactic to talk about it now. But the knowledge that isn't available to everyone are the elemental abilities. In Destination Unknown, the elemental abilities are tied to the Guardian's artifacts specifically. Now, there is a difference between the Guardians of the Eternal Light and the Guardians of the Eternal Life. The Guardians of the Eternal Light are the ones who have their element tied to an artifact. The Guardians of the Eternal Life are spirits who will be fully revealed in Expedition Uncharted during the Watcher arc. They have a specific purpose, and if you understand my paint bucket metaphor, you might have a vague idea on what happened to them. With that said, I will explain one of my community posts from a couple months ago. You may have seen Artixie next to a character you haven't seen before. If you were around for my earlier section on the origins of Destination Unknown, it was a Pokemon Mystery Dungeon fanfiction I created with a friend when we were speculating about Pokemon Black and White. Who Luxthanok is he's basically Zekrom. And this is to tie back into the origins of the story. While it is mostly a nod to my love of the Pokemon Black and White games and my childhood speculation surrounding them, it's also important that you understand why he is paired with Artixie. You see, Artixie and Luxthanok are the guardians of blood. They guard positive and negative blood. This manifests in the physical world of Volin as fire and lightning. And if you know how the Pokemon Black and White games work, Reshiram represents truth, Zekrom represents ideals. But the whole point is you can't have truth without ideals, and you can't have ideals without truth, or else you're not going to go anywhere. But to explain why they are the guardians of blood, I will refer you back to the Pokemon Black and White's villain team called Team Plasma. Plasma is the most abundant material within blood. It allows blood to flow like a liquid because of the energy that's charged to make it rush through your body. And plasma is something people donate, so scientists and medical professionals can use it to learn and to help heal serious conditions. My mind is kind of blanking on how I want to explain the importance of the metaphor without the spirituality side of it, but that's what they are. But when they're incarnated on Volin for a season, they are the guardians of lightning and fire specifically. But if you haven't already been able to tell, what I'm using to refer to as blood is plasma. And if you know plasma, plasma is a state of matter. So I'm not going to explain the other guardians of life and what they are. But if ticks and lukes are a state of matter, you should think with those scientific metaphors. What they are in terms of the quote unquote body, that is up to your own speculation. I'd like to think that my lore is stupidly simple when you get down to it. There's just a lot underneath the surface. But just like with my ciphers in Expedition Uncharted, I don't like handing out the answers specifically. If you want to know more about my lore, I ask you to join me on the journey that is all of these other characters' stories. Because even the Guardians of Life and the Guardians of Light have their own stories I really want to tell. And I don't want to spoil their journeys. To wrap this monster of a video up, I will be returning to YouTube. I will be doing live streams every other Tuesday. For now, working on Expedition Uncharted so I can get the rest of Season 1 out. And then after that, I will have the Adobe subscription again, and we will get back into episode 2. I know before I lost my streaming privileges on YouTube, I used to stream all the time, and I do kind of wonder if that's part of where my channel died. I don't know how many of you were around for when I used to live stream a lot, but it was a common theme in my update videos that I would figure out the mascot or persona characters my fans had, and then I'd put those characters in my update videos in the background as a thank you nod to watching my channel. I miss doing stuff like that, and I do think that in my own way, part of where my expectation for Destination Unknown just destroyed me was I lost touch with the reason a lot of people stuck around my channel. If you were around for when I streamed, I would have known you by your channel name and I would have actively talked to you on the live streams. I still remember a lot of you guys from back then. I know a lot of you have changed your names since those good old days when I was a tiny channel with 200 subs, but I want to get back to that. I really liked having that sort of connection with my fans, and honestly, my channel is dead enough that I don't think it will be overwhelming, at least at first. I like having small, tight-knit communities rather than like a large parasocial one. I like authenticity, and in some ways, just as I'm taking that barrier down with this monster of a video, I want to get back to expressing my authenticity with people. I don't like hiding who I am. Unfortunately, that's how I felt in the community pretty much this entire time. Once I started talking with other known creators, it just made me feel closeted, honestly. Just to summarize the sections for those who would have skipped over the other parts, I came out of the Catholic Church. I was very familiar with the alt-right pipeline. I didn't feel welcomed at all in the community because I came from a place of ignorance, and instead of feeling like I was in a place where I was welcome to learn, I felt like I had no one to talk to aside from the other people who were also going through the same struggles and deconstruction of both their faith and the stuff they were brought up in. And when you have to hide not only your political misunderstandings, but also your spirituality, which again, my spirituality has always been very, very important to me, it sucks. It really does. I understand that a lot of the community is also traumatized by stuff that often happened to them from religion or from their parents or from other people in positions of power that have shaped them into the person they are today. But it is lonely when you are constantly being told by everyone around you that you are not welcome in spaces if you believe XYZ, and there's no one to turn to even ask a question without judgment because you genuinely don't understand. I've provided that space for many many people over the years, but I haven't really had that space for myself. So I'm airing this stuff out here to explain my past, to explain what I can to the best of my ability without digging up the past. I know personally a lot of the stuff I discussed in the earlier sections are a lot more vague than I would personally like, but if you are interested in learning more about my background, I'm willing to talk about it more in private. Or if something in one of the earlier sections resonates with you, you're welcome to reach out. I won't tell anyone because I understand. I really do. Especially in regards to the alt-right pipeline and the propaganda surrounding it. I don't talk as much as I would like to on it because on the off chance that there is someone, just one person on my channel who is still deeply ingrained into that sort of ideology, I don't want them to feel condemned because I know, and other people I've talked to over the years who have gone through it, they know how difficult it is to deconstruct from that. I will say that when you use your words and become antagonistic towards these same people who are trapped in this ideology, it just reaffirms what their leaders and their own thoughts are saying about people on your side of the political and ideological spectrums. While I do agree that it is a attack on morality and a show of someone's moral character, morals are also very turbulent. They can be molded and morphed over time. It's all about knowledge versus ignorance, and whether you choose to turn a blind eye even after recognizing something as objectively wrong and still engaging in that same behavior that puts others in harm's way. Because I will say, part of why the gateways in conspiratorial thinking and heavily charged political spaces can be so addicting and draw you into their pipelines is due to the language that they use. A lot of people are basically subjected to the Dunning-Kruger effect. If you have confidence about something you're talking about, it doesn't matter what your sources may be, people respond to confidence. So a lot of people may sound like they know what they are talking about, but sometimes it really just is an illusion, and the person themselves likely doesn't even understand that's what's going on. But anyway, I really should just wrap this monstrosity of a video up. Thank you for watching if you watched through to the end or all the way through me rambling about the random stuff in my life. It means a lot to me. I'm excited to get back to YouTube, and I hope to see you around, whether it be in the comments section, on my live streams, or creating things yourself on your own individual channels. Let me know in the comments section what you're up to. Do you go by any new nicknames? If you were around for when I did stream a lot, I probably have a specific nickname I would still refer to you as. If you have a different name now, let me know so I can address you appropriately in the future. And I look forward to talking to you guys again. So have a wonderful day, and until next time.